The Kair Star State. Siwangxing Death, Star Dezhou Prison. The barely adequate living conditions did not bring prosperity to this planet. At some unknown point, it became a garbage world with mountains of mechanical wreckage piled high, intermittent arcs of electricity flashing, and the air thick with the smell of burnt cables. The Dezhou prison, occupying nearly half the planet's surface, stood amidst these ruins. Its sections like fortresses glowed with an eerie solemnity under the light of the blue star. It was the largest prison in the entire Kair Star State, housing many prisoners and many unspeakable secrets. Consequently, it was equipped with highly sophisticated intelligent security and weapon systems. In over 600 years since its construction, it had a zero escape success rate, and combined with excellent benefits, it became the dream workplace for prison guards across the Kair Star State. Lin Jie once had such a dream and had strived for it for a long time. Heaven did not fail his efforts. After 23 years of struggle from birth to the present, he finally entered the 9th prison, successfully becoming a prisoner in custody. Prisoner T9527, Lin Jie, 23 years old, commoner. You are even more handsome than your photo. Prison T District Interrogation Room. Lin Jie sat on the interrogation chair watching the middle-aged woman place the file on the table and give him a slight smile, saying, "Hello, Mr. Lin Jie, allow me to introduce myself. I am Zhao Na Tongxi, the warden of the 9th prison." "Hello, warden. You may call me Miss Zhao Na or Mrs. Tongxi." One of the basic interrogation tactics, friendly communication to close the distance. Lin Jie returned a smile. "All right, Mrs. Tongxi. Actually, I've heard of your feats long before and am honored to meet you today. I didn't expect you to be so well preserved. At 55, you don't have many wrinkles on your skin." Xana's mouth twitched, her forced smile nearly breaking. "I'm sorry, that was rude. Allow me to rephrase. As an ordinary person, you look very young, hardly like a 55-year-old woman." "Is that so? Then how old do I look?" 54. "Do you think you're funny?" Zhao Na raised an eyebrow, her friendly smile gradually fading. "Your jokes are not funny at all, Mr. Lin Jie. Where do you think this is, eh? This is the 9th prison, and I am the highest authority here. I am interrogating you. An upgraded interrogation tactic applying coercion when the subject is uncooperative. Isn't there anything more sophisticated?" Lin Jie's smile grew wider. "All right, warden, just a joke. Don't get so angry. Excessive anger can cause abnormal secretion of luteinizing hormone from your anterior pituitary basophil cells. What would happen? It would cause irregularities in your ovulation." 95-27. Zhao Na was genuinely angry now. As a warden, she had seen too many prisoners. The 9th prison housed countless scum and villains, many of whom would provoke her wildly upon seeing her. But somehow Lin Jie's casual remarks angered her more than any filthy insults. But she had to hold back for now. After a few deep breaths, Zhao Na opened her eyes again, struggling to soften her expression. "Mr. Lin Jie, you are still young. Think about your family and friends. Think about yourself. You have a bright future ahead. Why must we talk like this? To be honest, I came to see you today because I want to help you." The ultimate interrogation tactic, playing on emotions. Lin Jie sneered inwardly, but his face showed a timely hesitation, as if pondering something. After a moment, he looked at Zhao Na and said, "Really? Can you really help me? A breakthrough?" Xana's eyes lit up and she coaxed, "Of course it's true. Otherwise, why would I single you out among all the prisoners in the 9th prison?" "Then what do you need me to do?" "I need you to cooperate with me." Zhao Na thought she had found a breakthrough, and a smile returned to her face. "I need your complete trust. Tell me your background, why you were sent to the 9th prison, what crime did you commit?" "What crime could I have? I'm only 23, I just wanted to live." "What crime?" Lin Jie complained inwardly, but his face showed a confessional expression. "To be honest, Mrs. Tongxi, I hacked into the presidential palace's security system, infiltrated the palace, spent 3 hours evading the guards, knocked out over a dozen bodyguards, found the president's son, and successfully snatched the lollipop from his hand." Xana's face turned ugly again, staring coldly at Lin Jie. "The president only has 3 daughters, no sons. Is that so? Then wait, he'll make up another one." "Mr. Lin Jie, don't rush, Mrs. Tongxi. I can make up many crimes. One of them will fit me." 9527. "Are you angry?" "Don't be angry, have you forgotten? Anger causes irregular ovulation." "Shut up. Shut up. You bastard." Zhao Na was truly furious, almost shouting at the guards to take Lin Jie away. After a long while, she finally calmed down and sat back in her chair. Dim light cast shadows on her deepening nasolabial folds due to age, and above them a pair of eyes filled with the venom of menopause. As it turns out, no matter the world, age is an absolute critical hit for those spiteful women. Beside the pool in the exercise yard, Lin Jie, having washed his face, lowered his head with a smirk at the corner of his mouth. Yes, Lin Jie was a fellow countryman of everyone present, originally from Earth. After transmigrating to this world, he spent 23 years from an infant, slowly learning the language and knowledge here, being strict with himself, abiding by the law, growing bit by bit, and step by step being imprisoned in the 9th prison. The twists and turns could not be explained in a few sentences. Who? Lin Jie let out a long breath. The water in the basin reflected his appearance: black hair, black pupils, and stubble that had not been groomed for days, gradually occupying the area around his mouth, adding a touch of world weariness. His slightly melancholic eyes, paired with a somewhat mocking smile, gave him a unique nonchalance. Unfortunately, the gray prison uniform and the electronic collar around his neck ruined the aesthetic of the whole picture. I've only heard about it before, but now I realize it's really uncomfortable. Lin Jie turned around, observing the other prisoners moving around, and touched the electronic collar on his neck. Most of the prisoners in the 9th prison were like Lin Jie, belonging to the so-called commoners, who looked no different from Earth people. It was said that this race was named so because it was common in the universe and had no distinctive racial features. As far as the eye could see, District T had only a few other races with varied and indescribable appearances. However, there was one thing they all had in common: wearing that electronic collar. According to Lin Jie, the collar, besides suppressing abilities, also had satellite positioning and explosive functions. If someone escaped the designated range or tried to open it with external force, it would explode on the spot, turning the person into a professional Xingtang cosplayer. Seeing everyone behave obediently, Lin Jie did not try to open the collar recklessly. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes, his consciousness sinking into his body. As a transmigrator, he actually had another thing: a Rubik's Cube. It was inside his body, either in his brain or somewhere else. Even interstellar-era instruments could not detect its exact location, and Lin Jie himself couldn't be sure, but he could see it as long as he closed his eyes. In a dim space, the cube floated there. It was made of an unknown alloy, all 6 faces the same color, but each small square had different pale white patterns. The crisscross dividing lines glowed with a faint blue light, full of a sense of technology. 23 years, Big Brother Cube. Admiring the cube, Lin Jie felt a rare sense of frustration. His connection with the cube could be traced back to before his transmigration, and Lin Jie was almost certain that his transmigration had a lot to do with the cube. At that time, he was just a fresh graduate. After finding a job, he went out to celebrate with a nice meal. On his way home at night, he noticed something reflecting light in the grass by the roadside. Out of instinctive curiosity, he went over to take a look. And that reflecting thing was this cube. Lin Jie's transmigration, or rather being tricked, began at that moment. Originally a cube with all 6 faces the same color, needing to be solved by piecing together fragmented patterns, was extremely difficult. Most people would give up after a few tries, at most taking it home as a decoration to study in their spare time. But Lin Jie was not an ordinary person. Call it obsessive-compulsive disorder or a quirk. In short, he had a peculiar obsession with puzzles, cubes, and deciphering. He once had a glorious record of staying awake for 3 days to clear a puzzle game. That night, this cube aroused his desire to challenge. He squatted on the curb by the roadside, constantly observing and conceiving. From evening until the dead of night, at the cost of 4 hours and half a pack of cigarettes, he finally pieced together the chaotic patterns on one face of the cube into a picture. And then he transmigrated. That's right, without any warning or hesitation. He didn't even get to see clearly what the pattern he had formed was, and just like that, he transmigrated. Starting as a newborn, it took him over 20 years to grow into a towering prisoner. And over these 20-plus years, the cube remained inside his body. He could see it whenever he closed his eyes, but it had done nothing. Lin Jie had tried many times to rotate it again and communicate with it. But the cube was like an irresponsible jerk. That night, it seduced Lin Jie, spent 4 hours with him on the curb, tricked him into this interstellar world, entered his body, and then left him alone. For 23 years, it just stood there, ignoring all of Lin Jie's efforts. This left Lin Jie. He transmigrated, seemed to have a cheat, but also seemed not to have one. Damn. After another failed attempt at communication, Lin Jie opened his eyes in frustration and muttered to himself: round-the-clock surveillance, ability suppressing, electronic collar, 50-meter alloy walls, military satellite protection, and this useless cube. How the hell am I supposed to escape this place? Rumbling. Suddenly, the metal gate emitted a heavy sound. Lin Jie and the other prisoners all turned to look, and 2 figures came into their view. Standing in front was a bald man, also a commoner like Lin Jie, but his body was much larger and stronger, probably over 2 meters tall, exuding a sense of oppression. He made the young curly-haired man beside him look quite small. The moment they appeared, the noisy exercise yard instantly fell silent. Prison boss. Lin Jie raised an eyebrow. The scene was like a noisy classroom, suddenly seeing the head teacher at the door, giving him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. On the other side, the bald man seemed accustomed to this scene. With no big reaction, he kept a straight face and walked into the exercise yard with the young man beside him. But what Lin Jie didn't expect was that a transport vehicle followed them, driving into the yard as they entered. On the vehicle stood a 5-meter iron thing, humanoid, with damage on its chest and abdomen, revealing the cockpit inside. Its overall proportions were slender, showing that the designer had deliberately pursued flexibility. However, Its condition was poor, aged, and mottled parts black smoke drifting from inside all indicated it was on the verge of scrapping. A field combat mech. Lin Jie squinted. How could there be something like this in a prison? The superpower system of this universe is divided into two major categories. Besides martial artists and sorcerers who cultivate their own individual power, there are also genetic soldiers and mecha pilots who rely more on technological means. The former gain physical and ability enhancements through genetic injections, while the latter fight by piloting powerful mechs. Notably, although genetic soldiers and mecha pilots rely more on technology, these two systems are actually rarer than martial artists and sorcerers. Genetic soldiers need no further explanation. The genetic compatibility alone eliminates countless candidates, and even after injection the survival and success rates are low. It is no exaggeration to say it is 1 in 100. As for mecha pilots, they are even rarer. Piloting a mech, especially a low-grade one, does not have very high hard requirements, whether by manual control or neural connection. It seems like a job anyone can do, but it is well known that often the professions that appear to have no threshold and are easy to enter are the hardest to become powerful in. This involves something no instrument can detect: talent. To give an example, it is like the familiar professional league of a certain game. There are hundreds of millions of players worldwide. Most have watched pro matches, and many once harbored the unrealistic dream of coach, I want to go pro. Yet in the end, there are only a few hundred true professional players. The rarity of genuine mecha pilots rivals that of pro players among gamers, perhaps even surpassing it. In the current situation, all prisoners in this facility wear electronic collars that suppress their abilities, rendering superhumans powerless despite their skills. If the mech before them could still operate and a professional pilot sat in the cockpit, it could wreak havoc throughout the prison. Of course, that would only be limited havoc. Mechs, whether personal or field units, share the same classification from low to high: Private, Vanguard, General, Dominator, Titan, and so on. Lin Jie could tell at a glance that the field mech before him was merely the lowest private class. Not to mention, it was currently damaged. Even if it were fully intact, it would at best be a bully among the prisoners and could never break through the 9th prison's layered defenses. What puzzled Lin Jie was why this mech was inside the prison and why it looked like it had just been in combat. Had everyone gone stir-crazy and started finding mechs attractive? The bald giant and the curly-haired man walked the mech forward, and all prisoners along the way stepped aside without daring to obstruct. The two swaggered up to a door that looked like a warehouse. The curly-haired man pushed it open, revealing the scene. Then Lin Jie's expression grew even more intriguing. Lathes, welding torches, hinges, wrenches, various tools were arranged in the room, and at first glance one could almost smell the oil. So many professional tools, they want to fix this mech. Lin Jie frowned. Though he was far from the mech, his eyesight told him it was already on the verge of being scrapped. Repairing a private class mech in this state would cost more in manpower and time than simply acquiring a new one would be cost-effective. Could it be a collector's item? No, that couldn't be. A new thought crossed Lin Jie's mind, but he quickly dismissed it. There were indeed some old antique collectors in the universe, some who, like wealthy earthlings collecting vintage cars, had a hobby of collecting antique mechs. Judging by its appearance, this mech was indeed old enough. But if it were a collectible, why would someone use it in combat? You hear about people smashing beer bottles over heads in fights, but who would use a blue and white porcelain vase to smash someone? That would be too extravagant. Lin Jie grew more curious, observing the duo's movements while pondering. The curly-haired man took many tools from the warehouse and began a thorough inspection of the mech from top to bottom, inside and out. The process lasted over 10 minutes, and finally he walked to the bald man with a disappointed look and gently shook his head. Instantly the bald man's face darkened further. With him as the epicenter, the air pressure within a dozen meters seemed to drop, making everyone's hearts sink unconsciously. An expert. Lin Jie narrowed his eyes slightly. Someone who could still noticeably affect the surrounding environment while wearing an electronic collar was definitely a cut above the other prisoners. No wonder the other inmates looked at this bald man like mice seeing a cat. Suddenly, as if sensing Lin Jie's gaze, the bald man turned his head and glanced in his direction. One look made Lin Jie feel like he was being stalked by a wild beast, the pressure immense. Lin Jie quickly averted his gaze, lowered his head slightly, and took 2 steps back, signaling that he meant no offense. His current priority was to leave the 9th prison, and he had to keep a low profile among the prisoners. Being too conspicuous would attract unnecessary trouble. But if he didn't seek trouble, that didn't mean trouble wouldn't find him. Before long, Lin Jie clearly felt himself. Looking around, he fixed his gaze on a towering alloy building behind him. High up in the building, behind a floor-to-ceiling window, Jana Downs stood with her arms crossed, coldly staring at Lin Jie with a mocking smile on her lips. The moment he met her gaze, Lin Jie suddenly realized a problem. He had played it too cool. During the interrogation, he had sensed that Jana was probing his background. Although he didn't know who had ordered it, Lin Jie understood that if he really exposed those things, Jana would likely make a move again. So during the interrogation, he kept attacking Jana's weak spots, angering her and forcibly ending the session. But now it seemed his provocation had backfired. This menopausal old woman no longer feared the unknown of his background and was now determined to kill him. Menopausal women really shouldn't be messed with. Lin Jie gave Jana a long hard look before turning away. His sharp eyes caught other prisoners approaching him. Two of them. One was a martial artist, and the other was also a This isn't fun anymore. Lin Jie frowned slightly. Martial artists had much stronger physical power than other systems. When everyone wore electronic collars and their abilities were suppressed, a martial artist facing other systems was like a father spanking a child, effortless. In the blink of an eye, the two men had already blocked Lin Jie from different directions. At this moment, it was man on man, left and right. Kill me. Lin Jie looked left and right and got straight to the point. The two prisoners were stunned for a moment, as if they hadn't expected Lin Jie to be so candid. But they quickly recovered, and one of them nodded with a vicious grin. It seems you're mentally prepared. That's right, someone wants you dead. Can we negotiate? Negotiate. The two prisoners exchanged glances, both wearing cruel smiles. Want to negotiate whether we leave you in one piece. I see. Lin Jie narrowed his eyes. By then the nearby prisoners had noticed the scene. They exchanged glances and turned to watch Lin Jie with interest. Even the bald man and the curly-haired man were no exception. In the 9th prison, although the escape success rate was 0, the mortality rate was not low. As long as the prisoners involved were not very special and there was no large-scale riot, the guards and security system would not intervene. Similar brawls occurred on average every month. For their monotonous prison sentences, this served as a little spice. However, the main spice was not the fight itself. There was nothing interesting about the fighting. They expected something else. For example, how would a fragile young man like Lin Jie react when facing a notorious murderer? Would he beg for mercy or present his back? The struggles of a weakling on the verge of death always gave them inexplicable satisfaction. Only this time their hopes were doomed. You can't kill me. After a brief pause, Lin Jie flashed a comment. Can't kill you. The two prisoners laughed as if they had heard a great joke, rubbing their ears incredulously. Kid, who do you think you are? I could smash your head with one hand alone. What makes you think you can say that? Because of him. Lin Jie grinned and casually pointed a finger. Everyone followed his gaze and made eye contact with the irritated bald giant. In an instant, the entire scene fell into dead silence. Lin Jie's single finger strike instantly silenced the clamorous recreation area. The surrounding crowd, initially mocking, withdrew their grins, and even the two martial artists blocking Lin Jie wore expressions of newfound docility. Simon, is this brat one of your men? One of them asked the bald giant, his face paling instantly. If Lin Jie truly had ties with Simon, then he had indeed kicked the steel plate, one that could shatter his own. No. Yet under the gaze of all, Simon shook his head decisively, denying the notion. The moment he spoke, all whispers ceased, and his voice, though distant, reached every ear with clarity. Seated beside the mech, he glared coldly at Lin Jie. But I don't care what tricks you're playing. Let me tell you, I'm in a foul mood today. You'd better not provoke me. So the kid was just stalling for time. The two assassins, hearing this, twisted their grins back onto their faces, advancing slowly from both sides like predators stalking a lone girl in the dead of night. A prisoner with no backing and no skills. Dead was dead. The 9th prison spanned 15 sectors, covering over a third of the planet, and deaths were a daily occurrence. In a few days, everyone would forget. The 9th prison would remain the 9th prison. I never claimed to be your man, nor am I playing tricks. Facing the encirclement from both assassins, Lin Jie remained calm, tilting his head towards Simon. I said I can survive under your protection because I can help you. You need me. Swish. At these words, the assassins halted again, glaring viciously at Lin Jie, before turning to Simon, like employees seeking their boss' approval. Though they believed Lin Jie was likely bluffing, when it came to Simon, they had to err on the side of caution. If they rashly killed Lin Jie and inadvertently hindered Simon's affairs, they would have no one to blame but themselves. In T District, Simon was in a sense mightier than the warden. You say I need you? On the other side, Simon rose and strode toward Lin Jie. The martial artist in front of Lin Jie, like a hyena cowering before a lion, stepped aside, allowing Simon unimpeded access. His nearly 2-meter height made Lin Jie just over 1.8 meters seem petite. You'd better explain clearly what I need you for. You should know fooling me is no kinder than death. How could I fool you? I'm latching onto your coattails. Lin Jie first looked up, meeting Simon's gaze for a few seconds, then tilted his head, slightly pointing at the field mech behind Simon. I can fix it. Is that enough? Fix it. Simon glanced suspiciously at the mech, then back at Lin Jie, his expression finally shifting. After scrutinizing Lin Jie for a moment, he slowly turned, made a follow gesture, and led the way toward the mech. Lin Jie followed, relieved that the two assassins dared not stop him. In any case, he had gambled correctly. Damn it. In an office in T District, Zhang Na watched Lin Jie's safe return, her gaze growing more venomous. As the largest and most advanced prison on Kr Xinghua, the 9th prison's security surveillance covered every corner, and Zhang Na observed every move below. And that only fueled her fury. Was a prisoner with no background nearly killed going to survive like this? Was this man who had just offended her going to gain Simon's protection so easily? Who exactly is this Lin Jie? Zhana turned strode to her desk, pulled out a communicator from the drawer and dialed. After a few short beeps, a man's voice answered from the other end. Madame Zhana, is it done? Forget that. Answer me one question first, Zhana interrupted. Is that Lin Jie a mechanic? A brief silence followed, then the voice turned stern. Madame Zhana, I recall advising you not to investigate Lin Jie's past. It seems you didn't heed my words. I didn't investigate him. Xana's face paled, but she stubbornly explained the situation. With Lin Jie, you know who Simon is, sir. If Lin Jie can truly repair the mech and gain Simon's protection, he'll have no chance to act. She added after finishing the account. Then the other end fell silent again, longer this time. Soft light filled the office with a small greenhouse nearby nurturing various plants. A normally relaxing atmosphere, now suffocating under the silence. Foolish. You're more foolish than I thought, Madame Zhana. After a long while the voice returned, but its tone had turned icy. Just killing an ordinary man, and you managed to make it so complicated. I'm curious what you're thinking. Sir, please let me explain. I don't need explanations. I want results. The man on the other end cut her off, but he's with Simon now. What am I supposed to do? Zhana frowned. Though no explicit answer came, the response confirmed that Lin Jie was indeed a mechanic. So the problem remained how to kill a mechanic protected by Simon. That's your problem. The voice grew impatient. I don't care about Simon. That's none of my concern. I just want Lin Jie dead. The rest is irrelevant. Irrelevant. Xana's eyebrows shot up, her own anger rising. Sir, please don't forget it's because politicians like you obsessed with so-called balance of interests who dare not judge men like Simon and dump them all here that my 9th prison has become what it is. Are you sure that's irrelevant to you? Watch your tone, Warden. A reprimanding reminder cut through the communicator, silencing Xana's subsequent tirade. Zhana, as if sobered by the reminder, glared coldly at the communicator and fell silent. Good. It seems you now know what to do. After a moment, a satisfied voice came through, then the line went dead, leaving only the busy tone. Bang. The next second, Zhana grabbed the communicator and hurled it against the wall, shattering it into a carpet. She leaned on the desk, breathing heavily with rage, her gaze growing ever colder. Lin Jie. If you can repair the mammoth, I guarantee no one in T District will dare to touch you. But if you're playing me, then he'll die a miserable death, right? No, you'll suffer something worse than death. At the entrance of the storage shed in the recreation area, the recreation period had long passed, and the inmates had returned to their cells. On the vast open square, only a single mecha remained, along with Lin Jie, Teeming, and Curly. Lin Jie was inspecting the mecha named Mammoth, while Teeming and Curly watched by his side. Good news and bad news. After a moment, Lin Jie leaped down from the mecha and wiped the grease off his face as he approached Teeming. The good news is that I am indeed capable of repairing the mammoth. The bad news is that under the current conditions I cannot completely fix it. Many precision components cannot be manufactured in this makeshift workshop. At best I can restore its basic functions, but it absolutely cannot engage in intense combat. Cannot engage in combat anymore. Teeming muttered, casting a questioning glance at Curly. Although Teeming was formidable in combat, he knew nothing about machinery. He needed to verify whether Lin Jie's words were credible, and Curly was the only professional by his side. His real name was Dyson, but because of his naturally curly brown hair, he was nicknamed Curly. Meeting Teeming's gaze, Curly gave an imperceptible nod. As the saying goes, professionals observe the craft while amateurs watch the spectacle. Although Lin Jie hadn't actually started working yet, the inspection procedures and techniques proved that he was indeed a mechanic, and a more skilled one than Curly himself. Alright, what do you need? Having received Curly's confirmation, Teeming turned back to Lin Jie and even stepped forward to pat his shoulder. As long as you can fix the mammoth, I can get you anything you want in T District. A private cell, delicious food, even beautiful women. Whatever you desire. Women are not necessary. Just get me some interchangeable parts for a private class mecha, especially the main control chip. That won't work. Lin Jie. What the hell? You're joking with me. The prison overlord whom no one in T District dared to provoke, a man who in some ways wielded more authority than the warden himself, someone who could even smuggle women into the male ward. It was obvious he had formidable connections outside the prison. You could even acquire a mecha right here in the prison, and now you're telling me you can't get mecha parts. You don't know the purpose of the mammoth. But instead of answering Lin Jie's confusion, Teeming threw the question back at him, eyeing Lin Jie with suspicion. What other purpose could a mecha have? Lin Jie raised an eyebrow slightly. It was like a car. What else could it do besides drive? More importantly, what did its purpose have to do with whether he could get the chip? You've got some nerve. No, you haven't even a single hair on that smooth skull. Lin Jie subconsciously glanced at Teeming's bald head. It seems you really don't know. Lin Jie's reply made Teeming wear a curiously intrigued expression, as if encountering something novel, leaving Lin Jie completely bewildered. Boss, let me explain to him. Curly stepped forward. He looked at Teeming first, and only after Teeming nodded did he turn to Lin Jie. It's simple if you put it simply, but complicated if you go into details. To explain it clearly, I'd have to start from over 60 years ago. Curly gestured for Lin Jie to sit down with him and began his tale. As he narrated, Lin Jie finally understood why a field combat mecha was housed in this prison. According to Curly, 60 years ago, the 9th prison, which occupied nearly half the planet, was still a strict penitentiary. It was equipped with comprehensive security facilities and formidable armed forces specially designed to incarcerate the most dangerous criminals arrested by the Karl Star Nation. No one had ever successfully escaped from it. This illustrious record once made the 9th prison the benchmark of the Karl Star Nation's penal system. But the problem lay precisely in this so-called benchmark. About 60 years ago, the Karl Star Nation captured a special criminal. This man was a notorious interstellar criminal who had committed numerous major crimes within the Karl Star Nation's territory, sparking widespread public outrage. Logically, a criminal of this sort should have been sentenced to death, without even going through formalities after capture. But the tricky part was that this criminal, while being a heinous felon, was also a noble from a higher-ranking federation. In comparison, the Karl Star Nation was far weaker. To illustrate with an analogy from our worldview, it was like a small country capturing a rogue general from a superpower. If they released him, the populace would be furious and their reputation would suffer. If they sentenced him, they didn't dare. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the Karl Star Nation's high-ranking officials could only imprison the criminal temporarily, leaving the problem to future generations. So where to imprison him? The 9th prison. Hearing this, Lin Jie murmured instinctively. Clearly, as the model prison of the Karl Star Nation, the 9th prison was the top choice for the High Command. Smart. Curly gave Lin Jie a thumbs up and continued his story. After the first supercriminal, it was like opening a floodgate. From then on, almost every so often the Karl Star Nation would capture another criminal as politically sensitive as that Federation noble, someone they dared not handle. Perhaps due to inertia in their thinking, or because those in power at the time needed political achievements, they never considered quietly releasing those people. Instead, they made high-profile announcements, garnered public support, and then stuffed all of them into the 9th prison. The 9th prison became a rowdy place. The originally stable structure crumbled under the impact of these supercriminals. Almost every block saw 1 or 2 prison overlords whom no one dared to cross. Teeming was one of them. And these changes were only within the prison walls. The situation outside was even grimmer. As the Karl Star Nation incarcerated more and more supercriminals in recent years, its politicians suddenly realized that while they gained public support, they had also offended an increasing number of powerful organizations. These forces united and began pressuring the Karl Star Nation's policymakers, demanding the release of their organizational pillars. When there were only 1 or 2 such forces, it was manageable. But now that so many big shots had joined the fray, the Karl Star Nation's politicians could no longer withstand the pressure. Thus, they chose to transfer this pressure onto the warden of the 9th prison, Zhang Tongxi. They demanded that Zhang Tongxi produce a solution as a response to those forces, and even forced her to hold direct dialogues with the leaders of those organizations. According to rumors, Zhang Na was scared out of her wits. You make her sound so pitiful. Lin Jie secretly glanced toward the distant high-rise of alloy. The floor-to-ceiling windows were still there, but Xana's figure was no longer behind them. He could imagine the immense pressure she had faced at that time. That a woman in her 50s could endure what even the rulers of the Star Nation had fled from was nothing short of a miracle. What happened next? Later, Zhang Tongxi really came up with a plan. Curly walked over to the mammoth and knocked on its external armor, a look of admiration on his face. This is the plan. Zhang Na decided to hold a competition on the Death Star. Can you imagine? She's a genius. Cully's expression grew noticeably excited as he continued enthusiastically. Though Zhang Tongxi was an ordinary person and 55 years old, it was undeniable that she was a capable and resourceful menopausal woman. As Curly said, Zhang Na devised a competition. The core of the contest was mecha combat. She found many private-class field mechas on this garbage planet and had them repaired to ensure they could fight. Then she numbered these mechas, gathered all the prison overlords, and had them draw lots to determine which mecha belonged to whom. Finally, she had these mechas participate in a flag capture battle within a constructed arena. There were no rules in the battle. All combat modes and means were permitted, even killing was irrelevant. The only objective was for one's own mecha to seize the flag by the end of the match. If a mecha won enough flag capture battles, 7 victories, or eliminated all other competing mechas, the prison overlord to whom that mecha belonged would gain freedom. The only rule was that mechas were not allowed to use spare parts smuggled in from outside by the major organization. This would accelerate the competition, eliminate certain mechas more quickly and intuitively, and also prevent the forces behind the supercriminals from sending in overspec parts that would upset the balance. So Teeming is one of those supercriminals. The mammoth is his assigned mecha, and you. Lin Jie looked at Curly. You're the pilot who drives this mecha. Yes. Curly shrugged in confirmation and added, I deliberately stole a high-ranking official spaceship, but my crime wasn't serious enough. Our leader spent several million stellar coins to bribe the Karl Star Nation government into giving me a heavy sentence and sending me to the 9th prison. You city folks sure know how to have fun. Lin Jie had a mouthful of sarcasm he had to spit out. You city folk really know how to have fun. Lin Jie had a retort stuck in his throat, eager to be voiced. It was the first time he had heard of someone spending money to secure a harsher sentence for themselves. This was truly a peculiarity of the world. Fortunately, his sharp little mind hadn't been fried like that mecha's CPU, and he could still untangle the logic behind it. In short, Curly had deliberately paid for a serious crime just to enter the 9th prison and pilot the mecha named Mammoth for Simon in the competition. As for how he himself would get out later, no matter how one looked at it, it was far easier to fish out an unknown like Curly than a big shot like Simon. In fact, if Simon ever truly got released, Curly being abandoned outright was not out of the question. Actually, there was supposed to be a professional mechanic with me, but he had an accident and couldn't make it here. I'm just a pilot not very good at repairing mechas. Curly added, 2 for the price of 1. Lin Jie momentarily lost his words, instinctively glancing again at the high window. Compared to that mechanic somewhere unknown, he was now more curious about how Jean Na had come up with such a perfect. Lin Jie asked himself, even if he had been the one to handle it, he couldn't have done better. On the surface, it seemed the politicians of Karl Star had handed the decision to Jean Na, but in reality, they had given her not power but a bomb. If Jean Na succumbed to pressure and released a batch of super criminals, and then those released criminals caused trouble that affected Karl Star and stirred public opinion, she would inevitably bear the brunt of the blame. At that point, the politicians could simply shift all responsibility onto Jean, not easily protecting themselves while quelling the public backlash. What about releasing none at all? That was clearly also not an option. These super criminals all had powerful backgrounds, ones even the high echelons of Karl Star dared not offend lightly. What leverage did a mere warden like Jean Na have? It was at this moment that the brilliance of this plan became apparent. First, since these super criminals had reached a level where they could influence public opinion, it indicated that the forces behind them were hardly reputable, mostly gray entities dealing in shady businesses. Second, since they had been arrested in Karl Star, the forces behind them were likely distributed around Karl Star. Common sense dictated that conflicts and contradictions must exist among so many gray forces. While they wanted their own people released, they would certainly be happy to keep their rivals locked up in the 9th prison. Under such circumstances, with a little maneuvering, the plan would be unanimously approved. Because the animosity among these forces was far greater than the friction between them and Karl Star, they would gladly make trouble for one another. Thus, Jean Na successfully transformed her own pressure into an internal conflict among these gray forces. Jean Na didn't seem like such a clever woman, perhaps she had a hidden advisor. Lin Jie glanced at the floor-to-ceiling window twice, then turned his gaze to Curly and Simon, steering the conversation back on track. What about when the mecha is damaged and needs replacement parts? Given the battle format Curly had described, the mecha damage rate was bound to be extremely high. If parts couldn't be replaced, surviving 7 matches without being scrapped would be a miracle. Our homeland isn't allowed to send mecha parts into the prison. Even if they do, they'll be confiscated. We have to find them ourselves. Curly stepped forward, casually placing an elbow on Lin Jie's shoulder, pointing toward the high wall beyond. Death Star isn't just a prison. It's also a junk planet with mountains of mechanical wreckage from spaceships' mechas. Most of it is scrap, but plenty of parts are still usable. After the mecha is damaged, Jean Na will have the guards take us to designated junk zones, giving us a day to find the part. So we have to scavenge through garbage piles for what we need. Lin Jie rubbed his nose and gazed toward the dozen-meter-high wall. Though he could see nothing, he felt an inexplicable sense of anticipation. After all these years in this world, this was the first time he would be dumpster diving. The three exchanged a few more simple words, and then Simon led Lin Jie and Curly back to his own cell. This made Simon's standing in Sector T clear. If Lin Jie wanted to change cells, he would have to inform the guard. The guard would ask for reasons, then decide whether to report it up the chain. Even if the process finished the same day, the reply would most likely be changed tomorrow. But Simon didn't need any procedure. He said Lin Jie would share his cell, and the guards promptly arranged it. He asked for a new set of toiletries, and the guards scurried to deliver them. Simon's words held more sway than their own father's, making Lin Jie inwardly wince. A prisoner casually ordering guards around without a single complaint. Could anything be more absurd? The answer, yes, there was. Following Simon and Curly through twists and turns for several minutes, Lin Jie finally arrived at Simon's cell. Opening the door revealed a completely Western European decor style. Warm tones throughout a living room. Upon entry, a satellite TV on the wall, a dining area and kitchen to the left, a meeting room to the right, and further in a study and a gym. Behind the living room and sofa stood a wine cabinet covering the entire wall, filled with prestigious wines. On the coffee table, a holographic communicator sat ready. You can contact the outside anytime. Lin Jie asked in surprise. Of course, otherwise how would my old buddies outside know I'm living well in prison? Simon walked to the wine cabinet, took out a bottle of red wine, and returned to the sofa before saying, "As long as I don't escape or harm any prison officials, I can do whatever I want. The guards will fulfill my requests." Lin Jie. A cell fit for a presidential suite with every guard acting as a servant. This wasn't serving time. It was a vacation. There are 3 or 4 empty rooms, each with its own bathroom. Pick one for yourself later. Other than my study and bedroom, which you may not enter without my permission, feel free to use anything in any other room. Simon then took out 3 professional wine glasses from a box, gestured for Lin Jie and Curly to sit, and poured wine as he said, "Originally, I had no mood to drink with Mammoth damaged, but your arrival has turned things around. Cheers, let's talk over a drink." That bald man certainly had some elegance. Lin Jie raised his glass to Simon and Curly, and after seeing both drink, he took a small sip. Afterward, the 3 discussed much about Mammoth, which parts were damaged, what components were needed. Lin Jie gave a brief explanation. However, neither Simon nor Curly were well versed in these technical details. Curly, at least being a pilot who dealt with mechas daily, could grasp some of Lin Jie's words. Simon, on the other hand, understood nothing. Talking to him was like a Northeasterner performing a folk duet for an American. Gradually, the focus shifted from the mecha itself to the competition. According to Simon and Curly, the Capture the Flag match had been held 5 times. To ensure fairness, justice, and transparency, each match was live-streamed on Karl Star's interstellar dark web. Obviously, the purpose of such a broadcast was to show the process to the forces behind the supercriminals, letting them clearly see their people's performance in the game. But what no one expected was that starting from the second match, the livestream blew up the dark web. Death Star 9th Prison Heavy Criminals Private Grade Field Mechas, no rules, no regard for life and death. This competition attracted massive numbers of dark web users, with peak viewership reaching 4 billion. Under this heat, betting agencies and multiple underground casinos joined in setting up gambling pools for this Death Island contest and promoting it heavily. With the momentum, even the dark web's registered user base began skyrocketing. Crazy, isn't it? Perhaps because he was more talkative by nature, or because he hadn't experienced such widespread attention, Curly was visibly excited, downing his wine in one gulp. Such popularity, such attention, such ratings. Even surpassing the regular mecha league, and we're only using basic private grade mechas. How incredible. Why aren't you showing any reaction? Suddenly, Curly looked at Lin Jie. What reaction do you expect? Lin Jie savored the wine lightly, his expression unchanged. What kind of reaction did you expect? Lin Jie sipped the red wine lightly, his expression impassive. His calmness did not mean he was entirely unsurprised by the impact of the Death Star competition, and on the contrary, he was initially quite baffled as to why such a crude tournament had become so wildly popular. Yet before that bewilderment could manifest on his face, he had already figured out the underlying reasons. Indeed, as Curly had said, as an interstellar civilization, the Cal Star boasted advanced technology and hosted official superhuman leagues and mecha leagues. Those leagues, akin to Europe's top 5 football leagues, were broadcast on major platforms and television, featuring higher-grade mechas, more refined mechanisms, and more comprehensive rules. In comparison, the brawls among Death Star's heavy criminals seemed utterly inferior. However, the official leagues suffered from 2 fatal flaws when it came to attracting audiences. First was their detachment from the masses. Admittedly, the official leagues boasted higher specifications, more powerful mechas and pilots, with a mechanical synchronization rate of over 50%. However, the mechas in those competitions were not something ordinary people could pilot, nor could the combat style of professional pilots be learned by the average person. In short, there was a high barrier to entry. This alone created a sense of distance, as it did not give people the illusion of, "I could do that too." But the Death Star competition was different. Despite its crude conditions and rough arena, the private class mechas had almost no piloting threshold. Anyone with a mechanical synchronization rate above 20% could handle them. Compared to the 50% threshold that eliminated 99% of people, a 20% synchronization rate was practically as easy as having hands. This inadvertently narrowed the gap between players and spectators, greatly increasing the scope of discussion among the audience. To draw an analogy, it was like traditional sports versus esports. Why had viewership of traditional sports been so fragmented by esports? Why did more young people choose to watch esports instead? The reason was simple. To some extent, sports leagues were disconnected from the masses. Take the NBA, for instance. We ordinary people couldn't possibly have such professional courts, dedicated coaches, referees to officiate, or the monstrous physiques of those athletes. We watch those professional players fly and dive on the court, clap and cheer for a moment, and that's it. Because we can't do what they do, that style of play simply isn't accessible to us. But esports are different. We don't need a court, a coach, or explosive physical fitness. Just a computer is enough to get a professional-like experience. Moreover, no matter how bad a player is, they always have 1 or 2 glorious moments worth bragging about. As long as there are highlights, there is discussion, and discussion generates buzz. The official league and the Death Island competition were somewhat akin to traditional sports and esports. Next came the second point, which was the key reason why the Death Island competition could surpass professional leagues in popularity. That was, the professional league never involved deaths. They had complete protective mechanisms, advanced mecha safeguards, and layer upon layer of insurance. Even if a mecha was scrapped, it ensured that the pilot inside faced no risk. In contrast, the Death Star competition was the exact opposite. Combat without rules permitted killing. According to Curly, in the first 5 matches 3 pilots had already been crushed into pulp by dozens of tons of steel. Such bloody and explosive battles naturally awakened the primal craving for blood and violence deep within people's subconscious, thus drawing higher viewership. After all, no matter how well fought, a match where both sides emerged unscathed could never be as gripping as one where at least one contestant was guaranteed to die. You make a lot of sense. The boss told me the same thing, Curly said, looking at Lin Jie. See, that's why he's the boss and you're just an employee. Lin Jie tipped back the last of the wine, nodded to Simon, and casually picked a room to rest in. The night passed without incident. The next morning, Lin Jie was awakened by Curly, whose loyalty to Simon was evident. Even knowing the repaired mecha meant risking his life, he remained full of drive. After a quick breakfast, Curly dragged Lin Jie out of Simon's presidential cell. In the distance, Lin Jie spotted a flying car parked on the exercise plaza surrounded by several armed prison guards. Death Star is a planet vast in size. With the ability suppressing collar on to travel quickly from one area to another, we have to use vehicles. As if you wouldn't need a vehicle even without the collar. Lin Jie glanced at Curly, but said nothing. Pilots, especially professional ones, to maintain the highest mechanical synchronization rate, were not allowed to harbor any other form of energy within their bodies. Even their mental energy had to be of the purest kind, free from any sorcerous methods except for neural-linked mechanical constructs. Otherwise, the neural connection would be compromised and mechanical synchronization would plummet. In other words, aside from specialized training and superior combat skills, pilots were essentially no different from a pilot without a mecha was like a sorcerer without mental energy or a martial artist without inner strength, purely mortal. Hey, tell me about yourself. Once aboard the flying car with the guards silently huddled in a corner, Curly, bored, turned to Lin Jie. How did you end up here? You dragged me here. I mean, what crime got you into the 9th prison? Curly said, exasperated. Lin Jie eyed him. Do you know why I didn't ask for the specifics about you and Simon yesterday? Why? Because I knew we hadn't built trust yet. Even if I asked, you'd brush me off and not tell the truth. So we still don't have trust. If you ask me now, I won't tell the truth either. You won't even bother to fabricate a lie to fob me off. Curly twitched the corner of his mouth, his interest in conversation killed by Lin Jie. He turned away and waited in silence. After about half an hour, Lin Jie felt the flying car slow down and descend gently. As the door slammed open, the scene outside was revealed. Countless mechanical wreckage piled like mountains, broken cables everywhere, the faint crackle of electric arcs, large machines in the distance processing and sorting garbage, and the metallic scent hanging in the air. Contact Kino. Connecting to Kino's communication line, please wait. Prison 9, Sector T. Simon's presidential cell. Simon, seated on the sofa in the living room, issued the command in a soft voice. The communicator's intelligent program promptly initiated the call. After a few rings, a pale blue holographic image materialized above the device. Oh, my dear uncle. The image revealed a young man with immaculate hair, dressed in a shirt and bow tie, sporting a neatly trimmed beard. Leaning against a desk, he held a coffee cup in one hand while greeting Simon with the other. How are you faring in prison lately, uncle? I watched the live stream of the last Death Island flag capture match. Was Mammoth severely damaged? Can it still participate in the subsequent battles? Well, regardless, don't lose heart, and please don't resort to any desperate measures. Of course, if you truly insist on dying, I'd advise against using that electronic collar. It lacks sufficient power and might not grant you a complete demise. If needed, I can have some medication sent in. A single milligram injection would ensure no chance of survival. Simon stared at Kino, his expression gradually souring. His full name was Simon Liar, and this young man was Kino Liar, his nephew, his blood nephew. This lad perfectly inherited the cunning and deceitful genes of the Liar family, yet he never deigned to cloak himself in the guise of a humble gentleman like his father. Even toward his own uncle, he always acted in a manner that begged for a beating. Enough, Kino. I didn't call to indulge your nonsense. Simon's face hardened as he scolded Kino, then continued. Help me look into someone. Lin Jie, 23 years old, a commoner with cosmic citizenship from the Calstar Nation. He was incarcerated in Prison 9 a couple of days ago and should be a mechanic of no low rank. Lin Jie. All right, I'll give it a try. Sensing Simon's seriousness, Kino's demeanor turned somewhat earnest. He picked up a tablet and operated it, but as a photo appeared on the screen, his brief solemnity vanished at light speed. Flipping the tablet toward Simon, he exclaimed with astonishment, "Oh, a handsome young lad. Have you taken a fancy to him, uncle? I never imagined that after just 2 or 3 years in prison your preferences would shift. Your jokes are anything but amusing, Kino." Alright, don't always scowl, my dear uncle. Frowning every day will lead to hair loss. Tell me, why do you need to investigate this person? Do I even have hair left to lose? Simon rubbed his bald head, where even a mosquito couldn't find footing. He refrained from bickering further with his nephew, and instead recounted the events of his encounter with Lin Jie the previous day. He had accepted Lin Jie true, but that didn't mean he fully trusted him. Lin Jie, an ordinary man, had encountered danger shortly after entering the prison. At that very moment, Simon happened to be nearby, his mech happened to be damaged, and Lin Jie happened to be a mechanic. These coincidences converging made it difficult for Simon not to suspect Lin Jie's identity, whether he might be a mole planted by the Calstar Nation government. This was precisely why he had asked Kaino to investigate Lin Jie's background. Given the Liar family's capabilities, accessing someone's records was a matter of minutes. So that's how it is. Kaino listened to Simon while casually flipping through his tablet. A faint smile crept onto his face. Uncle, this Lin Jie is quite intriguing. His records are encrypted. I can only retrieve basic information. His detailed history is inaccessible to me. Encrypted? Simon frowned. That confirms he's undoubtedly a mole. No, uncle, I believe this precisely proves he is not. Contradicting Simon's view, Kaino quickly voiced his dissent, tossing the tablet onto the desk. If I were planting a mole beside someone, I would fabricate a flawlessly detailed life record for scrutiny before the operation rather than concealing the person's entire past like this. That made sense. Simon nodded and turned to Kaino. What do you suggest we do now? Our mechanic met with an accident. Since a replacement has conveniently appeared, I recommend you cooperate with him for now. As for his true identity, I'll arrange further investigation. It'll take some time. Of course, if you're uneasy, I have another method. You can persuade him through other means. With the electronic collar, he's just an ordinary man, utterly defenseless. You. Slap. Simon ended the call, slumping onto the sofa in exasperation, while silently resolving if he succeeded in getting out of prison this time, he would certainly give his prematurely departed elder brother's son some well-deserved care. This helmet isn't bad. The Neuralink helmet on Mammoth had issues. The visual transmission module failed. This one can replace it. Let me check if the size fits. Death Star, some scrap zone. Lin Jie placed a helmet he had just removed from a scrapped mech onto Cully's head. It fit perfectly. After a brief examination, Lin Jie nodded in satisfaction, leaving the helmet on Cully's head as he began searching for other necessary components. Curly glanced at the prison guards monitoring them from a higher vantage point, then immersed himself in the search alongside Lin Jie. Though this was a scrap zone filled mostly with wrecked mechanical remains, just as one could always find usable parts in a junk car, a few treasures could still be scavenged here. Moreover, since private class mechs were basic models with low-value unit modules, few merchants bothered to salvage components from obsolete mechs. Thus, in just a short while, Lin Jie and Curly had gathered quite a few useful parts. Unfortunately, the most crucial component, the main control chip, remained elusive. Main control chips are valuable. If still functional, they're usually removed. We can't be sure we'll find one. The only silver lining is that we still have plenty of time. Lin Jie tossed aside a broken mechanical arm and turned to Curly, who was still searching diligently. Tell me about yourself. What's your mechanical synchronization rate, and what's your current rank? Synchronization rate, 64. Before incarceration, my mental strength had just reached the general level, though I've never piloted a general class mech. 64%. Lin Jie glanced back in surprise. With a 64% sync rate, and being a quasi-general level pilot, you could live quite well outside. Why did you enter prison to work for Simon? In this universe, the cultivation system's hierarchy from weakest to strongest mostly follows the pattern of EDCBA, except for pilots. This was because a pilot's rank was determined by the mech they could operate. The level of mech one could pilot defined one's pilot rank. A general class pilot was already a considerable achievement. Speaking of which, one must elaborate on the system of pilots. First, let's discuss the mechs. In this interstellar era, technological advancements are beyond imagination, with countless models and types of mechs. However, when categorized specifically, there are only two types. One is the agile and convenient personal mecha. The other is the large-scale field combat mecha like the Mammoth, specifically designed for warfare. In contrast, personal mechas are lighter, cheaper, more maneuverable, and operate solely via neural link, whereas field combat mechas are different. Field combat mechas are larger with thicker armor and more powerful firepower, and offer two driving modes, neural link and manual control. However, in most cases, the neural link mode remains the first choice, with manual control serving merely as a backup when neural link malfunctions. As for the difference between the two, how to put it? It's like the distinction between manipulating a marionette with strings and directly possessing the marionette to make it move. Once the neural link headset is worn, visual signals and sensory simulators activate, allowing the mecha pilot to control the machine as if it were their own body, even making the heavy steel frame perform incredible, highly difficult maneuvers. The second point to discuss relates to the neural link. It is also the most intuitive data distinguishing ordinary people from professional pilots. Mechanical synchrony rate. The so-called mechanical synchrony rate involves complex indicators and a multitude of integrated data. Listing them all is too cumbersome. The most straightforward explanation is the depth of neural connection. The higher the mechanical synchrony rate, the greater the completion of neural connection and the more thorough the control. This is an innate talent that cannot be detected by any instrument. Every pilot's mechanical synchrony rate is calculated by professionals after entering the mecha based on the delay between the mecha and neural commands, the completion of mecha movements, and the probability of executing high-difficulty maneuvers. According to statistics, most ordinary people have a mechanical synchrony rate of only about 20%. To become a professional pilot, the rate must be at least 45%. Do not underestimate this 25% gap. It is this very difference that excludes 99.9% of the universe's population. The disparity in numbers between ordinary people and professional pilots is even more pronounced than that between bronze-silver players and professional competitors. Combined with the low training cost of pilots and their greater influence on the battlefield compared to other systems, almost every civilization treasures pilots as precious gems, injecting them with longevity elixir regardless of rank and providing full benefits. Wan Mao is a pilot with a high mechanical synchrony rate of 64. It should theoretically live comfortably. Without the boss, my sister and I would have starved long ago. My life belongs to the boss. Wan Mao spread his hands and gave Lin Jie an answer, but did not elaborate. Lin Jie could see that Wan Mao did not intend to explain further, so he nodded and was about to resume working when a noise in the distance caught his attention. Looking up, he saw a flying car speeding from afar, finally landing not far away. The door opened, and several guards stepped out first, taking their positions before two young men in prison uniforms descended. Damn! At the mere sight of the two, Wan Mao's expression darkened. You know them? Lin Jie noticed the change and turned to take a closer look at the two men. One of them was a commoner, and the other was a rare Tan-Asian. The Tan-Asians' facial features resembled those of commoners, but their entire body was green, with the most notable feature being a tentacle-like appendage on their head. It was said that this tentacle was normally soft, but would stiffen under extreme anger or excitement, transforming from a limp braid into a rigid rod sticking straight up from the head. I do. Wan Mao nodded with a grim expression, pointing at the two. The commoner is Lin Jie and the Tan-Asian is David. They are also participants in the flag capture battle. Their boss has a grudge against boss Simon. The damage to Mammoth during the melee was partly Lin Jie's doing. I see. Then you can deal with them yourself. Watching Lin Jie and David approach, Lin Jie patted Wan Mao on the shoulder, turned around, and continued searching with his head down. For now, he was just a part-timer for Simon, aiming to survive by clinging to this powerful figure and find a way to leave the 9th prison. As for personal grudges between Simon and others, he had no desire to get involved. Wait. Lin Jie's thoughts halted, and his gaze sharpened, as if something had caught his attention. He strode over swiftly. Meanwhile, Lin Jie and David had already arrived in front of Wan Mao. Decent, didn't expect to see you here. Lin Jie clasped his hands behind his back, looking at Wan Mao with a surprised expression. You really are naive. With your mecha already so damaged, you aren't still thinking of participating in the competition, are you? Is that not allowed? Wan Mao's tone was indifferent. Allowed, of course allowed. I wouldn't mind blasting you apart again. Lin Jie's smile grew even broader. 5 rounds of the flag capture battle had already taken place, and 7 out of 20 mechas from the 20 districts of the 9th prison had been scrapped. Naturally, the pilots had become somewhat familiar with each other. Due to the rarity and generous benefits of professional pilots and the fact that the competition only involved the lowest grade private-level field mechas. Even the gray forces that ruled over the Karl Star Nation could not find highly advanced pilots to represent them. A vanguard-level pilot like Lin Jie was already considered high tier. Among the remaining 12 pilots, only 3 were of the same rank as him. The sole exception was Wan Mao, a brigadier general-level pilot, half a rank higher than Lin Jie. Despite the clear disadvantage in mecha performance, Wan Mao had snatched victory from them twice. Blasting someone like that, even if the means were dishonorable, still gave Lin Jie a sense of achievement. The only pity was that he had only damaged the cockpit, not killed Wan Mao. Then let's see who blows who up this time. Wan Mao stepped forward, staring intently at Lin Jie, almost ready to throw a punch, but was stopped by David's intervention. Decent, are you still dreaming of taking someone down? Can your mecha actually make it to the field? David spread his 2 green hands and laughed. You're just a pilot. Even if you have a smattering of mechanical knowledge, you're still just a pilot. How can you fix a mecha? You don't even have a mechanic. Right, David reminded me. Lin Jie looked at Wan Mao, his smile turning more sarcastic. With such severe damage, what makes you think you can compete? With your half-baked mechanical maintenance skills? Huh. At that, Wan Mao suddenly laughed. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but I do have a mechanic. A mechanic? Where? Lin Jie frowned. The mechanic who was supposed to enter the 9th prison with Wan Mao had been taken out by his own faction's forces. Even so, Wan Mao had still won 2 of the first 5 matches. Without reliable logistics, it would have been uncertain whether they could have taken him down. If there really was a mechanic who could repair Wan Mao's mecha, the remaining matches would become much tougher. Over there. Wan Mao sneered, turned, and pointed with a flourish toward Lin Jie not far away. At that moment he felt triumphant. His weakness had been addressed, and he could now fight Lin Jie on more equal terms. At the same time he wanted to show Lin Jie that he too had things Lin Jie had, and to stop looking down on him. However, the next scene took everyone by surprise. Beneath the azure star, Lin Jie stood atop a garbage mountain, like an old farmer bent over the soil, patiently searching for something. Suddenly he found a flash of joy crossing his face, and he reached out to grab it. Then, Zizi's, a momentary stiffening, a few seconds of convulsion, and Lin Jie's black hair quickly stood on end. Then, as if punched, his body arched backward, and he tumbled down the ruins with a clatter. Damn! This sight made Wan Mao's expression shift dramatically. Abandoning Lin Jie and David, he sprinted toward Lin Jie. Lin Jie, Lin Jie, are you alright? Lin Jie, Lin Jie, are you alright? Cough. Wan Mao, utterly panicked, rushed over and lifted Lin Jie, propping his upper body against his lap, then hastily patted Lin Jie's charred face. Lin Jie awoke as if from a dream, opening his eyes and exhaling a plume of black smoke that sprayed all over Wan Mao's face. I'm fine, just a bit dizzy. Lin Jie sat up, shaking his head vigorously. Piles of mechanical debris towered in this junk zone, including many aged energy cells. Having just found a treasure, he grew careless and neglected to watch his step, only to be electrocuted thoroughly. Fortunately, his physique was robust, as otherwise this would have landed him in the hospital. So this is your mechanic. Lin Jie and Dawei approached from the side, smirking with unmistakable schadenfreude. So what? Got a problem? Wan Mao's tone betrayed a lack of confidence. Originally, he had hoped Lin Jie would earn him some face in front of Lin Jie and Dawei, but Lin Jie's performance had instead left him embarrassed. Of course not, no problem at all. Setting aside everything else, staying conscious after such an electric shock shows impressive physical resilience. Take good care of him. We're off now, haha. Lin Jie tossed out the remark, then turned and headed with Dawei to scavenge the junk pile, laughing unrestrainedly as they walked. Truth be told, a mechanic getting zapped is hardly a big deal. A man who walks by the river often is bound to wet, which seasoned electrician hasn't been shocked a couple of times. The problem was that just a second earlier Wan Mao had been pontificating in front of Lin Jie. The next moment Lin Jie tumbled down the junk heap after being electrocuted, looking utterly pathetic. This contrast made Lin Jie appear thoroughly amateurish. From the way you handled the inspection yesterday, I could tell you were a senior mechanic. How could you make such a rookie mistake? Wan Mao shot Lin Jie an aggrieved look. Lin Jie's fall from above had also cost Wan Mao his dignity. Because the most common mistakes are the easiest to make. Lin Jie rubbed his sooty face. You're wrong. I didn't get electrocuted by accident. I did it on purpose. On purpose? Yes, on purpose. Then why would you deliberately touch a live wire? I think your hairstyle looks great. I wanted to get the same one. So this man would rather die than lose face. Wan Mao was momentarily speechless, at a loss for a retort, and could only silently give Lin Jie a thumbs up. Alright, take this. Not wanting to dwell on the subject, Lin Jie shoved a black disc-like object into Wan, an intelligent core. You got electrocuted because of this. Wan Mao's eyes lit up, and all his complaints instantly evaporated. Mecha classifications depend not only on tonnage, output level, and firepower configuration, but also on whether they are equipped with an intelligent core. An intelligent core does more than just handle the main control chip's workload. It contains built-in auxiliary intelligence that monitors the pilot and mecha in real-time, records combat data, and can even develop autonomous combat patterns based on collected data. When the pilot is absent, it retains a certain level of combat capability and judgment, effectively supporting combat operations under certain circumstances. However, intelligent cores are extremely expensive and are generally not installed on low-grade mecha. Typically, only mecha, at least at Vanguard level, are equipped with an intelligent core. Lin Jie had discovered this one on a scrapped Vanguard level mecha. It was precisely this unexpected windfall that had led to his careless electrocution. I wasn't electrocuted. I just got a perm, Lin Jie corrected. Fine, a perm it is. Listen, since you just got your perm, you must be uncomfortable. Rest here, and he'll handle the rest of the scavenging. Wan Mao nodded, stowed away the intelligent core, and moved with noticeably more agility, full of new. With the main control chip problem solved, the mammoth was now ready for combat. Everything else was minor. Lin Jie was the hero of the hour, so whatever he said went. However, Wan Mao failed to notice that once he turned away, Lin Jie's expression quickly calmed, and his gaze deepened significantly. Glancing around, and seeing that the others weren't paying much attention to him, Lin Jie leaned against a mechanical wreck, closed his eyes, as if resting, and instantly sank his consciousness into his own body. Even Lin Jie hadn't expected that this accidental electrocution would turn out to be a blessing in disguise. It had finally stirred the Rubik's Cube that had lain dormant for 23 years. So what's going on? Within the space of consciousness, Lin Jie gazed at the cube, floating silently, raising an eyebrow slightly. For years the cube had hovered there motionless, remaining unresponsive no matter what he tried. But now something above the cube, a pale blue one, had inexplicably appeared. In that moment Lin Jie felt a strange new connection between himself and the cube. It seemed he could actually twist it now. What's meant to come will come, there's no dodging fate. After a moment's hesitation, Lin Jie decided to give the cube a twist and see what happened. This thing had been inside his body for over 20 years, and it had finally shown some activity. If he didn't try, and that fragile link vanished, he might never get another chance. Click. With his mind made up, Lin Jie mentally commanded the cube. This time it obeyed, rotating exactly as he had envisioned. The patterns that hadn't shifted in 23 years were finally altered. The next second the cube trembled slightly. The pale white lines on the side facing Lin Jie suddenly glowed with a faint blue fluorescence. After a brief flicker, the fluorescent light drifted upward, coalescing into a holographic projection above the cube, complete with a detailed structural breakdown. From its appearance, it looked like an oversized fire gun. At the same time, a stream of information flowed into Lin Jie's mind. Star Beast Red Boa. Type Heavy Energy Gun. Grade E. Combat Mode 3. Output Energy Level 800-1700. Minimum Equipment Requirement Private Class Field Mecha. After reading the information in his mind and glancing at the 3D structural image above the cube, Lin Jie slowly opened his eyes, a question mark visibly forming on his forehead. 23 years. He had lived in this world for 23 years, checking the cube almost daily, trying to communicate with it, hoping it would react and give him some benefit. After all that effort, it finally stirred, and all he got was a weapon blueprint. And not just any blueprint, the lowest grade weapon blueprint. You've got to be kidding me. Lin Jie's eyes brimmed with exasperation. I'm a top-tier talent, for crying out loud. Do I really need you to hand me a blueprint of this low grade? Blueprints. Are they valuable? Of course they are. After all, superpowered individuals are extremely rare. Humanity's true strongest reliance is still technology and various levels of thermal weapons. Against this backdrop, high-tech weapons themselves cannot be cheap, and the value of high-tech weapon blueprints is naturally even higher, not to mention mecha weapons. Even the lowest grade A-level weapon blueprint, as long as it meets the specifications, whether sold to civilized political entities or to renowned interstellar arms merchants in the cosmos, can yield a substantial patent fee sufficient to ensure a comfortable life for an ordinary family. However, everything is relative. This blueprint might be extremely precious to an ordinary person, but to Lin Jie, its value is considerably diminished. An A-level weapon is nothing special. With Lin Jie's own knowledge and abilities, as long as conditions permit, he could easily produce over a dozen of them. Under these circumstances, this A-level blueprint seemed rather mediocre. Wait, I should calm down. As Lin Jie pondered, he examined the blueprint structure, and his expression suddenly shifted. Although only a few minutes had passed as a mechanic, he still discerned the unique aspects of this red python. Compared to the A-level weapons, he knew every indicator of this red python seemed to be optimized to the utmost. Specifically, the output energy level, firing intervals, and structural ratios all reached the most ideal state, something that was absent from Lin Jie's repository of knowledge. In his memory, there were virtually no similar weapons. The reason was simple. With numerous technological methods and weapon types, the shortcomings of many weapons could be compensated for by others, so people naturally would not fixate on developing a single weapon to the extreme. Take the pistol, for instance. Most people wouldn't bother trying to drastically increase its range and lethality, because doing so would be time-consuming, labor-intensive, uncertain of success, and ultimately unnecessary. If a pistol's range is insufficient, use a rifle. If a rifle's rate of fire is insufficient, use a submachine gun. If a submachine gun's lethality is insufficient, use a sniper rifle. Since problems could be solved by switching weapons, few were willing to stubbornly delve into overcoming a single weapon. But this red python was different. The weapon itself was not high grade, and its blueprint construction was not overly complex. Lin Jie could confirm that this weapon truly achieved the most ideal state in all aspects. Even compared to military and major tech corporations' weapons of the same level, it was no less impressive. Indeed, it was even superior. The blueprint is indeed the most idealized, but I don't know if it can actually function when built. Earlier, while searching for parts, I saw a heavy energy gun. Perhaps I can modify it according to this blueprint and give it a try. Lin Jie opened his eyes and stood up. Following his memory, he found that energy gun amidst the mountain. Though called a gun, it was designed for field mechs, so its dimensions were enormous. Over 2 meters long, resembling a cannon. It was a basic private's class heavy gun. Lin Jie carefully examined the gun's structure, confirmed that it could be simply modified according to the blueprint, and then called out to Curly Hair. Together they carried the heavy energy gun onto the flying vehicle. After tallying the necessary components and confirming they had enough, they chose to return directly. Heading back so soon. Did they give up? Not far away, as he watched the prison guards escorting Curly Hair and Lin Jie into the car, and the flying vehicle take off into the distance, Lin Jie couldn't help muttering to himself. Curly Hair's mecha damage was almost entirely his doing. He knew well the extent of that mecha's impairment, and didn't believe that Lin Jie and Curly Hair could find enough spare parts to repair it in such a short time. Actually, the external armor damage is manageable. The main issue is the master control chip. If we find that the rest is just minor problems, David interjected. As a professional mechanic, he knew more than Lin Jie, so they really can fix that mecha. That possibility cannot be ruled out. Lin Jie fell silent for a moment, then turned back to rummaging through the scrap, his eyes turning slightly cold. No big deal. That mecha of his isn't high-spec anyway. As long as I find allies or launch another ambush, I can wreck it again. He said it with unabashed confidence, as if he saw nothing shameful in relying on mecha superiority and ambush tactics to win. Maybe I've underestimated this cube. That night, as Lin Jie lay in bed resting, he couldn't help but think back to the day's events. 7 or 8 hours had passed since he returned to the prison. Although the intelligent core could solve the master control chip issue, it wasn't compatible with Mammoth. He needed a dedicated computer to make certain modifications to the intelligent program within the core. Simon had already arranged for someone to prepare it. It would arrive the next morning. There were still 4 days until the next flag-grabbing battle, so time was ample. After thoroughly examining the damage to Mammoth and the structure of the heavy energy gun and formulating a repair and modification plan, the day came to an end. Alone at night, Lin Jie's thoughts drifted back to the cube in his mind, and he grew increasingly convinced that it must contain more than just a single A-level blueprint. True, the blueprint that emerged this time was relatively mediocre, but on second thought, he had only given it with just that one twist, he obtained an A-level blueprint. What if he twisted it a third time, a fourth time? Lin Jie roughly estimated that a 3x3 cube had about 432.5 quintillion possible states. If each twist yielded a blueprint, they couldn't all be the lowest A-level, could they? Of course, getting a blueprint with every twist was an ideal scenario, and Lin Jie had only twisted it once, so he couldn't draw any conclusions. But even if it required several twists to produce a blueprint, the cube would still contain a staggering number of blueprints, possibly including some incredibly powerful ones. Of course, for someone still serving a sentence, such thoughts were far too distant. The immediate priority was to understand why the cube, which had remained inert for 23 years, suddenly reacted today. After pondering for a long while, Lin Jie arrived at one answer. Electric shock. Yes, recalling everything he had done that day, he believed that electric shock was the only possibility. Perhaps it was the electrical current that entered his body, activating the cube and enabling him to twist it. Moreover, that electricity was only sufficient for a single twist, which explained why the cube had now fallen. At this point, one might ask, had Lin Jie never been electrocuted before in his life? Why did it activate only today? Indeed, as a mechanic, Lin Jie had been electrocuted, and more than once. However, the technology in this universe was highly advanced, and protective measures were extremely reliable. Even if Lin Jie made a mistake during work, the power supply would be cut off instantly. So his previous electric shocks were mostly brief contacts with low voltage. Being stuck to a live wire for 4 or 5 seconds before being thrown off like today was a first. Lin Jie suspected that his previous shocks had been too short, cumulatively less than 2 seconds, resulting in insufficient charging for the cube. This time, the prolonged exposure to electricity provided enough energy for the cube to allow one twist. So to activate the cube again, I need to be electrocuted for a longer period once more. Lin Jie looked at the power socket in the bedroom and couldn't help wincing. Even with his resilience, recalling the sensation of the electric shock that day gave him a pounding headache. Mainly, he hadn't heard of any other transmigrated suffering so much to use their cheat. What was this? Transmigrated into an interstellar universe, and I get stronger by electric shock. You're the mechanic, so why am I the one doing the work? The next morning, in front of the warehouse of Fengfeng Square, watching Lin Jie tapping away at the computer nearby, Wan Mao, who had been tinkering with the mecha for an hour, couldn't help but complain. The temperature outside the Siwangxingshi was even higher, and maintaining the mecha was a labor-intensive task. Even though Wan Mao had a physique superior to ordinary people, his arms were already aching faintly. Do you understand smart core algorithms? Lin Jie looked at Wan Mao. No. Oh. Lin Jie nodded, then added, do you know about energy weapon power conversion? Don't understand that either. So you know nothing? What else can you do but manual labor? I have nothing to say. Wan Mao gave Lin Jie a speechless look, climbed the ladder, and stuck his upper body back into the mecha cockpit to continue working. Lin Jie took all this and chuckled to himself, and then lowered his head to continue his own work. Ximeng was highly efficient. The computer Lin Jie needed was delivered before dawn. Because Lin Jie had to repair the smart core and modify the firearm, both of which were substantial tasks, he had no choice but to tell Wan Mao which parts needed replacement and maintenance, letting the Titan pilot handle the Hansen work while he first began restoring the smart core. After all, this was the foundation of the mecha's operation. Without it, everything was empty talk. A blue star hung in the sky. Inside the compound, enclosed by alloy walls, the two men buried themselves in their work. Ming knew nothing about machinery or mechas and could only keep bringing food and drinks, unable to help in any other way. However, as a talkative person, Wan Mao was not silenced by the food and drinks. At the hottest part of midday, when the prisoners on recreation had all returned to their cells, Wan Mao took a short break and approached Lin Jie. Lin Jie, how much do you think this smart core will help me in the flag capture battle? Compared to the other mechas, what advantages can it bring me? Aren't you a brigadier, general-level Titan pilot? Lin Jie looked at Wan Mao suspiciously. Most Vanguard-class mechas are equipped with smart cores. As a veteran Titan pilot, you don't know the advantages of a smart core. You said most, not all. Wan Mao scratched his head. These things are too expensive. My own mecha isn't equipped with one. I've only driven a few other Vanguard-class mechas with smart cores a few times, but I never really used the Smart Assist, so I don't know much about it. Oh, I forgot about that. Lin Jie glanced at Wan Mao and nodded slightly. Wan Mao's situation was a reflection of most Titan pilots. Although this profession was rare and paid well, the value of a mecha still exceeded the compensation they could obtain. The vast majority of Titan pilots, especially low-level ones, did not own any mechas. The mechas they operated in battle were generally provided by the organizations they served. To put it bluntly, most low-level Titan pilots were just well-paid employees. If they didn't purchase a mecha, their income could ensure they lived comfortably without worries. But if they got their own mecha, it was like getting married, paying a bride price, taking on a mortgage and a car loan, and having to hand over their wages while also worrying about the kids' expenses. The originally generous salary instantly seemed much smaller. The most significant advantages of a smart core are roughly three. First, it can monitor the mecha's status in real time and provide feedback to the Titan pilot, allowing the pilot to immerse themselves fully in combat. Second, Lin Jie paused, picked up the cold drink Meng had brought, took a sip, then turned his attention back to the computer. While working, he continued, second is computational power. Although a Vanguard-class AI might be a bit dull in real-time combat, an AI is still an AI. Its computing capability is always stronger than a human brain. At least stronger than yours. Why do I feel like you're insulting me? Wan Mao gave Lin Jie a dead-fishy look. Lin Jie didn't even look at him. While operating the computer, he continued, if the mecha has the appropriate configuration, it can calculate wind force, air, humidity, planetary gravity, and so on. At the very least, it can assist the Titan pilot in aiming. The third point, and the most important one, is that the smart core allows the mecha to operate independently, that is, fight without a pilot. Although there are certain limitations, it truly frees the Titan pilot and increases tactical diversity. Take this Mengma, for example. Based on the data you gave me, the Mengma ranks only in the middle to lower tier among the 20 mechas. Meng clearly has terrible luck. How dare you say that about the boss? He's your boss, not mine. Even if he were here, I'd dare to say it. Lin Jie shrugged casually. There were differences between private class mechas as well. Some were military mechas, some were racing mechas, and others were entertainment mechas. Entertainment mechas were simplified versions specifically manufactured by machinery companies to satisfy ordinary people's aspirations for mechas. They had clear gaps in all aspects compared to military and racing mechas. To some extent, the Mengma belonged to the entertainment mecha category. Among the more than 20 mechas prepared by Zhang Na, the Mengma was at the very bottom. In Lin Jie's view, if it weren't for Wan Mao's higher rank compared to other Titan pilots and his high mecha synchronization rate, the Mengma couldn't have won 2 flag capture battles. It wasn't wrong to say that Meng had bad luck. Let's continue talking about this mecha. Lin Jie pointed at the Mengma without lifting his head. Its tonnage, armor thickness, and firepower configuration are inferior to military mechas. Its output energy level and maximum torque are not as good as racing mechas. If it weren't for its flexibility, it would be almost useless. Fighting other mechas of the same level would definitely be very passive. You should know that well. I really don't want to agree with you, but you're right. Wan Mao's face fell, as if recalling some unpleasant memory. It's different with a smart core installed. With the smart core, the mecha gains autonomous combat capability. You can be freed for a period of time, and you can coordinate with the mecha to do more things, thereby changing the course of the battle. For example, have the mecha pin down the enemy mecha from the front while you jump out of the cockpit and pull out the opponent's battery. You're basically asking me to get myself killed, aren't you? Wan Mao looked at Lin Jie, his face clearly saying, I can't understand that. The tactic Lin Jie proposed was indeed feasible. As a Titan pilot, Wan Mao had seen other pilots hand over control to the AI and leave the field mecha to take on opponents. But all of this had one prerequisite: single soldier mecha support. Only when armed with a single soldier mecha could a Titan pilot's strength, speed, and protection be significantly enhanced, granting abilities comparable to those of a martial artist. However, the flag capture battle on Siwang Dao only allowed field mechas to participate. The Titan pilots had no right to be additionally armed with single soldier mechas. Under these circumstances, without the protection of the cockpit, the Titan pilot was nothing more than an agile, physically fit, ordinary person. Given that field mechas often weighed dozens of tons, even a slight graze would be enough to kill someone. It's indeed risky, but not impossible. Lin Jie said without looking up. I know a Titan pilot who with only simple equipment assistance has done what I described more than once. Really? What's his name? His name is Jie Kubo. Before becoming a Titan pilot, he was just a Kubo, formerly a rifleman. I'll look him up sometime. Wan Mao clearly didn't realize Lin Jie was making a reference, but he secretly noted the name in his mind. Soon, however, his attention shifted back to Lin Jie. Watching Lin Jie's hands flying across the keyboard, Wan Mao suddenly smiled, leaned in close, and lowered his voice. Lin Jie, you're definitely more than just an ordinary mechanic, aren't you? Oh. Lin Jie stopped working for the first time and looked up at Wan Mao. What makes you say that? I don't understand mechanical programming, but I know this must be an extremely complex job. An ordinary person couldn't work and talk so smoothly with me at the same time like you do. Lin Jie didn't answer. He gave Wan Mao a deep look, then quickly lowered his head and typed even faster. Lin Jie. Wan Mao was startled. What's wrong? Is something up? Yes. Lin Jie nodded. I just realized that during the time I was chatting with you I typed a lot of wrong code. Wan Mao. Lin Jie was a bit of a perfectionist. Unless there was a special situation, he would never leave work that could be finished today for tomorrow. To adapt the smart core to the mecha, he spent over 10 hours from daylight until late at night and completed the work that same day. In front of Ximeng and Wan Mao, he installed the smart core onto the mecha. Hum. After a brief waiting period, the steel giant let out a hum. The visual light on the head of the Mengma lit up, and the 30-ton deep blue mecha raised its head. Program activated. Self-check in progress. Current energy 84. Energy supply normal. Neural connection device normal. Sensory simulator normal. Body structure intact. Curb weight 32. 5 tons. Smart code 1. Absolutely execute the Titan pilot's orders. Smart code 2. Assist the Titan pilot in combat. Smart code 3. Prioritize the Titan pilot's safety. I'll protect the Titan pilot. 7th generation Vanguard class Smart Core Kai in awaiting orders. Done. Listening to the smart response coming from the mecha, Lin Jie let out a long sigh and stretched. Now he could devote himself fully to the second task. The second task was to examine the blueprint of the Crimson Python etched in his mind. The cube's rotation granted Lin Jie not only the design of the Crimson Python, but also more detailed information, such as the alloy properties required for its construction, the ideal metal, and the optimal energy source. Theoretically, if forged strictly according to the blueprint specifications, it was possible to achieve the most ideal state. Of course, that remained only a possibility. As a mechanic, Lin Jie would not make definitive claims without prior experimentation. The problem, however, was that he lacked the proper materials and did not have sufficient time to craft such a Crimson Python. As a weapon designed for a Tensoften's tactical mech, the Crimson Python's blueprint specified a ready mass of 400 kilograms. With Lin Jie working alone in the workshop's rudimentary conditions, 3 days were far from enough to produce it. Thus, Lin Jie had to attempt modifications. That was precisely why he and Wan Mao had brought back a heavy energy gun. Although the two weapons shared a similar overall structure, they differed in many aspects, with the most significant discrepancy being the materials used. The energy gun Lin Jie retrieved had material properties that deviated from those required by the Crimson Python. To convert it into a replica of the Crimson Python, he had to recalculate the weapon's maximum output energy level based on the existing materials. This was a massive undertaking. If Lin Jie were to compute it manually, it would take at least half a month, and even then accuracy was not guaranteed. Fortunately, Simon had prepared sufficiently advanced computers, allowing Lin Jie to bypass the most complex calculations. With the computer assisting the calculations, and Wan Mao occasionally lending a hand as a pilot, Lin Jie managed to fabricate the pseudo-Crimson Python right on schedule after 3 days. I've repaired that heavy energy gun. Tomorrow's flag capture battle will give you an extra means of lethal force. That night, Lin Jie, Simon, and Wan Mao gathered in the president's cell. Simon drank his usual expensive red wine, while Lin Jie and Wan Mao had warm water instead. Lin Jie simply did not care for alcohol, and Wan Mao wanted to avoid consuming any alcohol the night before the battle. Won't carrying that energy gun affect the mammoth's agility? Simon asked. Though he knew little about mechanics, he understood that increased load would impact maneuverability. There will be some impact, but not too much, Lin Jie acknowledged. Then he added, it's unavoidable. The Mammoth has almost no firepower configuration and is extremely lacking in long-range attack options. To make up for this shortcoming, it must be equipped with weapons. Relatively speaking, energy weapons are much lighter than other types. Wan Mao nodded in agreement with Lin Jie and then asked, anything I need to be careful about? Yes. Lin Jie nodded, raising 3 fingers. This gun has 3 modes, or rather 3 power levels: a practice mode with low output, a normal mode with stable and moderate output, and a war mode with full firepower. But I suggest you avoid using the 3rd mode unless absolutely necessary. Why? This gun was salvaged and then modified. It's not that stable. If you go full power, it might overload and explode. Lin Jie replied after a brief pause. In truth, he was lying. Indeed, full power could cause an overload and explosion, but the reason was not the weapon's age. Rather, he had modified it entirely according to the Crimson Python's most ideal state, a theory that pushed the weapon to its absolute limits. Lin Jie was uncertain whether it would truly hold. Since he had no place to test it in the prison, he had to split the output into 3 levels. Apart from the war mode, which had the highest output, Lin Jie was absolutely confident that the other 2 modes would work without issue. That was why he advised Wan Mao not to use war mode unless it was a last resort. After all, if a weapon malfunction affected Wan Mao or the mech, Lin Jie would have to take responsibility. By stating this in advance, he was also giving Wan Mao and Simon a heads up. Alright, I'll be careful. Wan Mao nodded, then suddenly remembered something. Make sure to study the materials I gave you about the other mechs and pilots. You're my support crew now. Knowing them better will help you with real-time analysis. Don't worry, I've already read them. Lin Jie nodded languidly. During the flag capture match, pilots were allowed wireless communication. While the pilots fought, mechanics would also connect to the communication channel to watch the live broadcast. This allowed them to monitor the mech status and observe the situation, providing off-field assistance to the pilots. Before Lin Jie's arrival, this task had been handled by Simon himself. However, Simon was completely clueless about such matters, leaving Wan Mao to fight alone, a bitter experience. That was why Wan Mao had been hoping Lin Jie could help him these past few days. After careful consideration, Lin Jie agreed for 2 reasons. First, Lin Jie believed that Zhang Na, or rather the person behind her, would not easily give up on targeting him. He was not safe at the moment. To survive, he still needed Simon's protection. Second, while repairing the mech these days, Lin Jie had also closely observed the prison structure and security forces. He had basically confirmed that escaping on his own was unlikely. The force behind Simon was his only potential ally. By maintaining a good relationship with Simon and demonstrating his value, he might eventually gain assistance in regaining his freedom. With this in mind, Lin Jie decided to help Wan Mao and Simon, and to do so with full dedication. Thus, he had already thoroughly studied and memorized the materials Wan Mao gave him. Now that 5 matches had passed, 7 of the initial 20 mechs had been eliminated. Among the remaining 13, 3 were the most troublesome. 2 were retrofitted, decommissioned military infantry-level tactical mechs, and 1 was a former infantry-level competition mech. Military mechs are designed for the battlefield, large tonnage, thick armor, and heavy firepower, but they are relatively slow. I suggest you avoid direct confrontation with them. As for the competition mech, it's a high-performance machine used in professional leagues. Its energy reserves are comparable to those of military mechs, but for the sake of spectacle, its tonnage and defense are not as strong. However, it has superior agility and more flashy moves. If you face it, I recommend keeping your distance and using the energy gun for mid to long-range attacks, Lin Jie advised. Alright, I'll remember that. Hearing Lin Jie's professional instructions, Wan Mao nodded solemnly, feeling much more confident. The 3 chatted briefly before returning to their own cells. The next morning, when the blue star rose and its first rays spilled across the land, Lin Jie opened his eyes and got up. He gazed into the distance through the window. The 6th match of the Death Star flag capture was about to begin today. Perhaps it was to garner higher attention and viewership. Like many variety shows and sports events on Earth, the start time of this life-or-death flag capture battle was set on a rest day afternoon. After a hearty lunch and a brief nap, Lin Jie and his 2 companions, having conserved their energy, boarded a specialized transport ship with their mecha around 3 in the afternoon. Inside the cabin, a high-tech electronic display was split into 2 screens. On the left, a female host with a charming face and a voluptuous figure was speaking with exaggerated expressions. On the right, an aerial shot showed the battlefield for this flag capture battle. Discarded mechanical wreckage, barren land, and complex terrain exuded a palpable post-apocalyptic vibe. Atop the remains of a vertical warship, a blue flag was planted. In the upper left corner of the screen, a small humanoid icon was followed by a long string of numbers. This is the live broadcast on the dark web. The number in the corner is the concurrent viewers. Curly was chatting with Kane nearby, trying to build more synergy. Simon approached Lin Jie, pointing at the upper left corner of the screen, and said, "The influence of the Death Star flag capture battle is still expanding. It has now connected to dark web users from other civilizations and consortiums. Look at these staggering numbers. It's still 2 hours before the match starts, but the concurrent viewers have already exceeded 2 billion. Indeed, it's very high." Lin Jie couldn't help but admire. The Karl Star Nation had over 20 colonized planets with a total population of around 200 billion. Excluding those indifferent to various competitions, only about 10 billion people remained interested. Most of these were commoners who generally had no access to the dark web. Under these circumstances, reaching such viewer numbers was to some extent comparable to professional mecha leagues. And this was just the pre-match preparation period. Once the match officially began, the viewer count would only become more terrifying, with viewership likely reaching an almost unimaginable level. A spectacular event indeed. Lin Jie crossed his arms quietly watching the broadcast, occasionally glancing at the rapidly scrolling chat box below. After a moment, the transport ship landed and the hatch opened. "They'll head over first," Curly said, turning back to Simon and Lin Jie. To ensure fairness before the match, the mecha had to undergo an inspection procedure to confirm that no violent modifications had been made, forcibly adding any configurations beyond the standard private class level. As a pilot, Curly had to be present, so he had to temporarily part ways with Lin Jie and Simon. Simon and Lin Jie, under the guidance of a prison guard, arrived at a temporary room. Pushing open the door, they saw the room filled with professional equipment, the most prominent being two large monitors. One displayed the dark web live broadcast, and the other connected directly to the battlefield interior, and multiple drone feeds allowing the mechanic to freely switch cameras to capture real-time views of their pilot. "Hello, hello." After a moment, the radio on the operator's bench crackled with Cully's voice. "This is the Mammoth Mecha. Communication confirmed. Over, over." Lin Jie quickly picked up the headset and put it on, replying swiftly, "Not heard, not heard." No reply, no reply. Curly, Simon. They both suddenly felt that Lin Jie, their mechanic, might not be all that reliable after all. David M. at the inspection station. "I see, Curly. Judging by the operational status, his mecha has indeed been..." At the inspection station, mechas were lined up in two neat rows awaiting inspection. Lin Jie had arrived relatively early and had already completed his inspection. Waiting quietly for the match to begin, he frowned as he saw Curly approach and spoke into the radio. From the start of the flag capture battle, Curly had always been one step ahead of him. In the third match, Curly snatched the flag from him at the most critical moment, winning the victory. This made Lin Jie increasingly resentful of Curly. He detested people who were clearly superior to him in some aspect, especially when they competed in the same arena. That was truly infuriating. "It seems they did find the main control chip." David's voice came through the radio. "Don't worry. His mecha is not advantageous in any aspect. Weak long-range firepower, extremely low error tolerance, and easily crippled. Now it seems he has some long-range capability." Lin Jie, looking at the energy gun in the Mammoth's hand, pondered briefly, then took a photo with his communication wristband and sent it to David. With a backer of no less influence than Simon, he had all these basic configurations. "It looks like a modified base model Type 7 heavy energy gun." After a moment, David's voice sounded again. "Don't worry. Although this energy gun has a long range, its output energy level is low and the armor-piercing capability of the energy rounds is poor, resulting in insufficient lethality. Your mecha is military grade with thick armor and strong defense. This gun poses no threat to you." "That's reassuring." Lin Jie nodded with relief. "How are the viewer numbers?" "Still rising. It's already at 2.5 billion. What about the mecha inspection? Can we ensure the match starts on time in 2 hours? Just received word. Everything is proceeding normally. Barring unforeseen circumstances, all inspections will be completed within half an hour." "Good. Notify Kenny to prepare. The camera will switch to the commentary in 10 minutes. In a certain room of the 9th prison sector, a Jinnah had transformed it into a broadcast control hall. The hall was filled with monitors displaying various feeds, with dozens of people bustling about. Jinnah, dressed in a blue professional suit, stood at the center of the hall, watching the feeds from each monitor and issuing commands methodically. Compared to her demeanor in the interrogation room, she now seemed more like a leader. "It's going well, no problem." Seeing the viewer count skyrocketing, Jinnah took a deep breath, her eyes gleaming with excitement. In the 9th prison, everyone knew she was the warden, but few knew that in her youth she had been a director for a certain interstellar channel show, and one highly regarded by her superiors, earmarked for significant development. Had she followed the normal trajectory, she would likely be at the level of an interstellar channel director by now. Unfortunately, Jinnah had greater ambitions. She craved status and power. The Interstellar Channel's production team was merely a stepping stone for her. After one of her programs became a hit, she, as the director, gradually gained opportunities to meet influential figures. She seized these opportunities astutely. Leveraging her youthful beauty and a bold willingness to go all the way, she successfully established very pure and impure relationships with several political figures, using these connections to pave her way into the political arena. Later, her ambitions swelled further. With that same boldness, she engaged in more and more affairs with a growing number. Relying on these, she climbed to her current position. But in recent years, she had hit a ceiling. As Lin Jie had provoked her, she was an ordinary person with no background or special abilities, now aging. The beauty she once prided herself on had been overtaken by wrinkles, and her once prominent peaks had become deflated mounds. Barring unforeseen circumstances, the warden's position would be the peak of her life. However, this flag capture battle gave her a glimmer of hope. Involving complex relationships among multiple gray forces and the terrifying attention on the dark web, it had triggered a massive chain reaction. Countless eyes from the underworld, betting companies, and political circles were fixed on Death Star. This could very well be another stepping stone for her. Warden, the inspection station has sent word. The inspection is nearing its end. Good. Jinnah nodded. All right, switch the broadcast feed to Kenny. Harsh conditions, war of the steel bodies, elimination without regard for life or death, the dawn leading to freedom. Welcome to the Darknet livestream on a restful afternoon, watching the Death Star flag capture battle. I am your host and commentator, Kenny Brown. This program is exclusively sponsored by Planet Assassin, the killer agency that leaves no target hidden. Are you still terrified by the strength of your enemies? Are you still fearful of being ambushed? Contact us. Frame-ups, assassinations, annihilations. There's nothing we can't do. If you need murder for hire, just find Planet Assassin. Nightfall Armory, dealing only in super-spec weaponry. The Death Star flag capture battle is specially presented by Nightfall Armory. Alright, welcome to the commentary booth. Enough small talk. The contestants and mechs are now undergoing final checks and warm-ups. Let me introduce our participants and their mechs. In the control room, Lin Jie found a chair, sat down, propped his feet on the console, and watched Kenny on the live feed with interest. Compared to Jana, who worked behind the scenes, Lin Jie had actually heard of this Kenny before. If memory served 7 or 8 years ago, this Mr. Kenny was a professional lead commentator. With his excellent looks, magnetic voice, unique insights, and strong empathy, he had amassed a huge fan base, even surpassing top-tier professional players. His company seemed intent on grooming him as an idol, and he even made cameo appearances in some films and TV shows. But unfortunately, the young and famous Kenny couldn't resist the temptations of the glamorous world. At his peak, multiple scandals erupted, and he vanished from public view. Yet unexpectedly, Jana had recruited him to Death Star as the host and commentator for the battle. A fitting role, at least. Watching Kenny. He's a witty young man, unfortunately entangled with too many women. Simon came to Lin Jie's side and said, "No." Lin Jie shook his head and pointed at the bottom left corner of the screen. "I'm watching the chat box. It's far more entertaining than the commentary." Chat box. Simon glanced over. Due to the massive number of online viewers, to protect the servers and ensure viewing experience, the Darknet's Death Star livestream had set talk permissions. Only users meeting certain level requirements could speak. But even so, the chat box scrolled at an astonishing speed, making Simon dizzy. User 4568138-513. Come on, those who can speak are all level 5 members. Be arrogant. Night Dancer, wasn't Mammoth badly damaged last time? Has it been repaired? I see Mammoth on the betting list. Is it really fixed? Professional killer taking all assassinations, Darknet certified 4-star professional assassin, accepting targets below level. Interested parties can DM or email my Darknet mailbox. Serious inquiries only. Call me Princess Nina. Why are there little ads everywhere? Can't they just get lost? So fierce. Compared to Simon's dizzying confusion, Lin Jie's ability to capture information with his eyes and process it with his brain was clearly faster. Seeing this message, he raised an eyebrow. He first clicked on the professional killer's avatar, and indeed saw the 4-star killer certification in the info below. Combined with the earlier claim of accepting targets below level, it suggested this guy was at least level, possibly even a level. Clearly this was a real hardcore individual. This is getting interesting. Lin Jie narrowed his eyes, automatically filtering through the countless scrolling messages, focusing only on the killer and Princess Nina's movements. Soon the killer surfaced again. Professional killer taking all assassinations. Call me Princess Nina. Retract your words, or I will take measures. Call me Princess Nina. Take measures. Who are you trying to scare? What can you do? Professional killer Princess Nina. Leave your address, and see if I dare. Princess Nina. Find my address is, as if you dare to come. Unknown user Princess Nina. Did you buy your level with money? This is the Darknet. Do you think you're watching regular TV? Jerry, who loves cheese. Princess Nina. Brave. Seeing his 4-star killer certification, you dared to reveal your address. I'm utterly in awe. After that, it was all users ing Princess Nina, some warning, some sarcastically praising. Princess Nina herself disappeared for a few minutes, probably to actually check the killer's certification. A moment later, she popped up again. Princess Nina, a 4-star killer, so what? I don't believe he dares to come kill me. Unknown user 666. Professional killer Princess Nina, don't worry, I'm already on my way. Star Beast Surgeon, oh my god, this is going to be a show. Princess Nina, who are you trying to scare? After saying this, Nina disappeared again. Lin Jie watched for a while, and saw nothing more, thinking the farce was over. But just as he was about to shift his attention, Her Highness reappeared. Princess Nina. Star Beast Surgeon Jerry, who loves cheese. Unknown user, it's over. The killer blocked me in private chat, and I can't apologize to him. He's really coming to kill me, isn't he? What do I do? Am I really going to die? Professional killer, please, I was wrong, spare me. Lin Jie. And that's it. Where's your pride? Where's your confidence? Didn't you think he was bluffing? Aren't you a princess? Such coward. A mere 4-star killer, what's there to fear? Fight him to the end. Karl Star Nation, Dorno Galaxy. This planet boasted excellent living conditions, abundant resources, and developed transportation. One of the political and economic centers of the Karl Star Nation. Its status was akin to Shanghai in Shenzhou or New York in the USA. The highest commercially valuable professional mech league in the Karl Star Nation was also held on Main Star, home to the most prestigious clubs in the country. At that moment, in a certain club's training hall, having finished her day's training, Zhang Rui sat in her mech holding a tablet, intently watching the Death Star livestream with a serious expression. However, unlike Lin Jie's boredom, she wasn't concerned with the drama between an ignorant girl and a professional killer. Compared to that, she cared about the competition itself. Xiao Rui, what are you watching? Just then a black girl emerged from the adjacent training room, greeting her while climbing the ladder to sit beside Zhang Rui. Becky, finished your VR training. Zhang Rui didn't hide anything, moving the tablet closer to Becky. It's the Death Star flag capture battle livestream. Want to watch together? What's so interesting about that? Becky was initially curious, but after hearing Zhang Rui's words, she immediately showed a disdainful expression. A bunch of pioneer-level pilots driving private-level mechs. It's just child's play, isn't it? What technical skill can such a competition have? Xiao Rui, are you okay? With that, Becky exaggeratedly reached out to touch Zhang Rui's forehead. We're professional players piloting sovereign-class mechs, and you're the best among us. Last season's runner-up in the individual battle. Why would you want to watch this? I'm fine. Zhang Rui pulled Becky's hand away from her forehead, rolling her eyes. Kappa told me to watch. Kappa? The one who beat you in the individual finals last season. Becky was startled. Who else? Zhang Rui. Kappa, like her, was a top-tier player in the pro league playing for a different club. However, unlike Zhang Rui, who had been groomed as a professional since childhood, Kappa had once been a military pilot. Later, for some unknown reason, Kappa retired and switched to the pro league halfway. In his very first individual season, he charged into the finals and won the championship dominantly. And Kappa's opponent at that time was Zhang Rui. I've always wondered, Kappa's mech specs and synchronization rate were slightly inferior to mine. How could he beat me? Yesterday, we attended the same party, and he gave me an answer. Zhang Rui said. Really? What did he say? Becky's eyes lit up. Sharing the experience of a galaxy champion was highly valuable. He said the reason he could beat me was that I've never felt the threat of death. Zhang Rui shrugged. He said the pro league has huge commercial value, powerful mechs and training facilities, even better than the military. The only difference is that whether in training or competition, we're too safe. Protected by various systems, we know that even if we lose, we won't get hurt. But for him, any mistake on the battlefield could mean death. What kind of logic is that? Becky frowned. According to him, do we have to go to the battlefield and risk our lives to beat him? That's hard to say. Zhang Rui didn't reply, but lowered her head to continue watching the match. Kappa had told her yesterday about the Death Star competition, that at this level the technical help for her would be minimal. It was more about making her feel the cruelty of living on the edge of death. Not surprisingly, Cully's mech passed the inspection successfully. Although intelligent cores were typically equipped on Pioneer-class mechs, it didn't mean only they could have them. The intelligent core itself didn't enhance mech performance at all. As for the modified fake red Python, there was no issue either. Such a weapon with output clearly within private class standards would be verified by instruments as not exceeding limits. At this point, all 13 mechs had entered the field, scattered across different corners of the battlefield. The camera first switched rapidly, giving each mech a close-up, then switched to a wide-angle overhead view. Starting from the blue flag, it quickly panned across the entire battlefield, finally hovering at an angle with excellent visibility. So, dear viewers, Kenny's unique voice rang out, seeming to seize everyone's heartstrings. The 6th Death Star flag capture battle. Now, begin. Boom. Almost as soon as Kenny's words fell, an explosive roar echoed and smoke and flames erupted. This was a life-and-death war from the very beginning. There was no need for anyone to be courteous. As the shell detonated, the dozens of tons of metallic beasts within the arena finally bared their fangs. Get the hell out of my way. Lin Jie's blaster brandished its massive onboard machine gun, unleashing a torrent of firepower to suppress any opponents charging at it. He piloted a standard military mech, thick armor, heavy tonnage, high energy output. Yet its frame was relatively cumbersome, with limited maneuverability in close combat. At the battle's onset, when energy reserves were ample for all, getting entangled in melee would nullify the military mech's energy advantage. At that moment, the 40-ton steel colossus advanced slowly, cradling its heavy machine gun firepower surging. Shell casings over 50 millimeters in diameter flew and clattered to the ground, drowned out by the fierce cannonade. Clang! The clashing of metal sent a tremendous shockwave, an invisible hurricane billowing outward. Wan Mao had also clashed with his opponent. Luck was not on his side. He encountered one of the 3 toughest mechs, the only racing mech in the entire lineup, named Red Dragon. True to its name, its external armor was a brilliant red. The 6-meter-tall humanoid frame was slender and well-proportioned, with various weapon configurations concealed beneath the armor. Cyan indicator lights flickered, and it was equipped with a specialized high-tech combat blade. In the clash between Wan Mao's mammoth and the red dragon, it was like a trained professional boxer overpowering. Despite the disparity in tonnage and power level, even though Wan Mao had raised his alloy combat blade, he was still forced backward relentlessly. The opponent's tonnage and power level surpass our mech. Recommend disengaging immediately. Kane's analysis and advice came swiftly. I know. Wan Mao's face was now completely hidden by the helmet's visor, but the gravity in his voice was unmistakable. Pushed back over 10 meters, the mech's leg armor struck a pile of debris behind him. Wan Mao finally twisted his blade, angling the alloy sword to deflect the red dragon's strike, and rolled the mech swiftly to the side. The 30-plus-ton frame gouged a trench into the ground. As he stood up, the armor on the left arm flipped open, revealing a pitch-black tube. A flamethrower. This was likely a standard weapon for all entertainment mechs. Low energy consumption, minimal danger, yet with impressive visual effects. Its only drawback was its lack of damage. Whoosh! A torrent of flames spewed forth, drenching the red dragon's body, but it didn't halt the machine. A flash of the blade, and the massive mech lunged forward again. Damn it! Wan Mao gritted his teeth, raising his blade to meet the strike, using the force to retreat another distance before turning to flee. The racing mech's stats comprehensively overwhelmed the mammoth. Even with a higher mech synchronization rate than his opponent in an unknown duel, he was constantly at a disadvantage, forced to retreat again and again. Wan Mao is being suppressed. He's up against a racing mech. Aren't you going to do? No, I'm not. How could you be so calm? In the monitoring room, Simon stared at Lin Jie, who was sitting before the console playing a little tablet game with gusto, and his expression nearly slipped out of control. From what he had seen so far, Lin Jie's role as support was virtually non-existent. Don't rush. Rushing one. Lin Jie spoke. While gaming, the red dragon as a racing mech costs even more than a military one. In terms of power level, tonnage, and agility, the mammoth is at a disadvantage. There's little room for maneuver. All Wan Mao can do now is stall. Stall until when? Until a third mech charges into the fray, or until the red dragon's pilot realizes he can't finish off Wan Mao quickly. At that moment, Lin Jie's minigame just cleared. He tossed the tablet aside and said, the big shot behind the red dragon has no grievance with you, right? So his primary goal is to win the match, not to destroy the mammoth and keep you from getting out of prison. As long as his objective is to capture the flag, as time passes, he will inevitably abandon his assault on Wan Mao and go for the flag. I hope you're right. Simon watched the broadcast where Wan Mao was being pushed back relentlessly, his eyes growing. As it turned out, even a big shot like him couldn't stay completely composed when faced with the temptation of freedom. Boom. Elsewhere, the battle raged on. Over a dozen mechs, each weighing more than 30 tons, made the ground tremble as they moved, the broadcast feed slightly distorted. Wan Mao raised his energy shield, blocking a barrage of bullets from the red dragon. Just as the red dragon's pilot was about to advance again, a voice came through the radio from logistics. Hook, that's enough. Don't waste too much time on this mech. You're drifting away from the center of the battlefield. Understood. Hearing the words over the radio, Hook in the red dragon's cockpit nodded, cast one last glance at the mammoth, and turned away. After the previous exchange, he knew it was impossible to finish off the mammoth quickly. Phew. Wan Mao let out a sigh of relief as he saw his opponent depart. He raised his hand to look at the alloy combat blade. It was already showing cracks, with faint arcs of electricity flickering and a wisp of dark smoke rising. Kane, how's the mech? Some components are slightly misaligned, within adjustable range. All systems operating normally. Smart core computing stable. Remaining energy 62. Given this match lasts 40 minutes, if we continue high-intensity combat like we just had, our energy likely won't last until the end. I recommend avoiding close combat for now, conserving energy, and switching to long-range attacks. Damn, this is tough. Listening to Kane's report, Wan Mao felt the situation was extremely tricky. Compared to the mammoth, the red dragon's configuration was clearly a tier higher. In just 7 or 8 minutes of close-quarters combat, it had already drained a third of the mammoth's energy. And this battle had only just begun. There were still half an hour ahead. Time to avoid combat. Wan Mao looked around, and when no one was paying attention, he retreated further, all the way to the edge of the arena. He hid behind a massive meteorite and pulled out the energy gun strapped to his waist. For a mech like the mammoth, whose stats were at a disadvantage in every aspect, the only way to claim final victory was to avoid battle and wait for the right moment. Drag it out until the battle's end, when everyone's energy was almost depleted, and then emerge to try and snatch the prize. His previous 2 wins had come from this very tactic. Now, hiding in the distance, all he could do was rely on the energy gun in his hand, hoping it would live up to its promise and help him cripple 1 or 2 opponents. Time to see how lethal you really are. Wan Mao examined the false crimson python in his hand, exposed half his frame from behind the meteorite, and shouldered the weapon. At that same moment, Lin Jie took his legs off the console, straightened his posture. Well, we can see that Hu piloting the red dragon has abandoned his assault on D-Sun. It seems he has realized that D-Sun is a tough nut to crack. From a tactical perspective, this is a wise choice. The match has just begun, and there's no need for the Red Dragon to waste substantial mech energy on the Mammoth. For D-Sun, who pilots the Mammoth, conserving resources is even more critical. As a mech disadvantaged in nearly every stat, he must ensure sufficient resources to compete in the later stages of the flag capture battle. At this stage, avoiding direct combat or engaging with ranged weapons is the optimal strategy. Kenny sat in the broadcast studio watching the live feed, rapidly commentating on the match. At that moment, the camera followed Curly, who was hiding behind a meteorite, zooming in on his energy gun. The weapon had a grayish-white barrel over 2 meters long with a sizable energy furnace at its rear, glowing a faint green. D-Sun is undoubtedly the highest-level competitor among all pilots. He has clearly recognized his predicament and is preparing to harass from a distance with his firearm. We can see that the gun in his mech's hand is a heavy energy weapon. Such energy weapons generally come in 2 types, those with an independent energy supply and those drawing power from the mech. The gun D-Sun wields is Mark Corporation's 5th-generation basic energy rifle, an independent energy type. Compared to traditional field mech firearms using solid ammunition, this energy weapon has both advantages and disadvantages. Its strengths are a high rate of fire, stable trajectory with no significant drop, and ammunition sourced from the energy furnace, eliminating the need for extra physical rounds and thereby reducing the mech's burden. However, air resistance dissipates energy rounds more quickly than solid ammunition, resulting in generally shorter effective range and lower lethality. Against field mechs weighing tons, this basic energy rifle can still impede and damage structures, but it can rarely penetrate the external armor to directly threaten the pilot. Indeed, no one's success is accidental. Lin Jie sat in the monitoring room, nodding slightly as he listened to Kenny's commentary. Kenny possessed impressive professional knowledge, analyzing both tactics and equipment with clear reasoning and structured logic. Most impressively, he could even identify which model the energy gun in Cully's hands had been modified from. That gun had lain in the scrap heap for years, its trademark and serial numbers nearly worn away. Even Lin Jie himself couldn't name it. Then the camera switched to the central combat zone. Lin Jie turned his attention to another monitor, adjusting the view to focus on Curly, still hidden behind the meteorite. With a thunderous boom, missiles, energy shields, alloy war blades, and iron bodies clashed endlessly in the battlefield, composing a symphony that stirred the blood. At the heart of the battlefield, 3 mechs dominated, 2 military models and 1 racing model. Their superior configurations and attributes gave them an edge, allowing them to seize advantageous positions and engage several adversaries. Clang. Huke's Red Dragon crossed blades with another mech. The 2 massive alloy war swords met, sending sparks flying, and upon landing kicked up a cloud of dust. Prepare rocket punch. Huke's eyes flashed. The mech's arms folded together, and the thruster at the Red Dragon's elbow joint emerged. The next second, the engine roared like a savage beast, spewing a pale blue exhaust. With a swift turn, the Red Dragon slammed its 80-centimeter diameter steel fist into the opponent's back. Bang! A deafening explosion. The back armor of the enemy mech deformed severely, and the Red Dragon's fist sank deep into it. The stricken mech stiffened, its indicator lights flickered a few times, then dimmed. Like a person struck by a blunt blow, it toppled rigidly to the ground. This is a war of life and death. Huke cast only a brief glance at the fallen mech before turning and advancing toward the summit of the wrecked battleship. As a professional pilot, he didn't even need to confirm whether the mech had truly lost combat capability. With back armor deformed to that extent, the cockpit must have been crushed as well. The pilot inside, even if alive, would be utterly incapacitated. If only I were piloting that mech. Lin Jie was right. The boss draw really sucks. Curly, watching from a distance, felt a trace of envy. In truth, in terms of overall capability, he was the strongest among all pilots, yet he had to pilot nearly the weakest mech. Focus. Lin Jie's voice suddenly echoed in his ear. Someone spotted you. Someone. Lin Jie's warning came just in time. Curly pulled his attention back and soon spotted a mech charging toward him at full speed. It was also a humanoid mech, roughly 6 meters tall, with dark gray external armor, a broad frame, and thick mechanical limbs. The tremors in the ground with each stride revealed its considerable tonnage. Damn! Curly cursed, quickly switching his energy gun to normal mode and adjusting the barrel. Having already participated in 5 flag capture battles, he had memorized every mech present, and this one was no exception. The hulking black machine was called Gladiator, piloted by a man known as Lao He Old Black. If one had to classify it, both Gladiator and Cully's current Mammoth belonged to entertainment-grade mechs. However, there were gaps even among entertainment types. Unlike the Mammoth, which was built merely to satisfy ordinary people's fantasies about mechs, the Gladiator had once been a racing mech. Though not a high-end racing model, it had actually participated in private-level competitions. But due to design flaws that couldn't keep up with competition intensity, it became obsolete and was later retrofitted by mechanics to entertainment specifications. This mech had substantial energy reserves, significant tonnage, thick armor, and high output energy levels. By the numbers, the Gladiator was only slightly inferior to the three Titans at the battlefield's center, and logically should have been a hot contender. Yet the Gladiator never achieved a good ranking on the odds list. The reason lay in a fatal flaw: a lack of weaponry. Aside from a basic energy shield, it had no ranged capabilities, relying entirely on mass and strength. This clumsy fighting style made the Gladiator seem dull-witted, easily kite and toyed with. Compared to those mechs, Cully's own was indeed an easier target. Decent, don't run if you've got guts. Pilot Lao Hei's face twisted into a sneer. Run. Curly raised an eyebrow and let out a cold laugh. You. Who do you think you are? As the Gladiator drew near, Curly allowed it to close the gap a little more, then abruptly pulled the trigger. The energy furnace hummed softly, warming up for about half a second. The next instant, rat-a-tat-tat, the distinctive firing sound of an energy weapon erupted. Cully's false red python unleashed a torrent of energy bullets at an almost absurd rate, all slamming into the Gladiator's armor. For a moment, the incessant clatter of metal against metal filled the air, sparks flying. In the blink of an eye, the Gladiator's armor showed dents and breaches. That powerful red warning lights flashed inside the cockpit, startling Lao Hei. He quickly rolled behind cover, disbelief etched on his face. He had chosen Curly as his opponent largely because energy weapons were generally weak in lethality. He believed the Gladiator could withstand the fire. But to his astonishment, in just that fleeting moment, with tens of rounds fired, Curly had pierced part of his armor, an effect nearly comparable to Lin Jie's onboard heavy machine gun. Lao Hei's expression grew increasingly incredulous. Was that kid really using an energy gun? Such intense firepower. The sudden burst of firepower startled even Wan Mao himself, who looked at the crimson python in his hand with a shocked expression. But soon the shock was replaced by excitement. Strong firepower meant he had another means to fight the enemy. Lao Hei, come out. You coward with a heart as timid as a mouse. Didn't you tell me not to run? Why are you hiding? He stood his mech, held his gun sideways, and transmitted his voice through the mech's loudspeaker. After speaking, he quickly moved in a flanking maneuver toward the Gladiator's position. The power of the energy gun far exceeded his expectations. Now he needed to change his tactics. Thump. The mammoth was small in size and thin in armor, but its movements were relatively agile compared to other mechs. Wan Mao chose a route with cover based on the terrain, advanced quickly, and soon circled to the side of the Gladiator, raising his gun and firing. The crimson python's energy reactor trembled, spitting tongues of fire that instantly engulfed the Gladiator. To avoid being hit in vital areas, Lao Hei could only raise his arm to protect the cockpit and quickly seek cover. Damn, this piece of junk can still suppress me. After circling around, Lao Hei realized the Gladiator was too bulky. If he couldn't close the distance, he would just be toyed with like a monkey. Glancing left and right, he simply thrust his iron fist toward a scrap hovercar in the garbage mountain. With a crisp bang in his ears, the iron fist had already punched into the hovercar's body. Go to hell. Amidst the hail of bullets, Lao Hei, piloting the Gladiator, held the hovercar in front of him as a shield and charged toward Wan Mao, braving the gunfire. However, he had clearly underestimated the crimson python's firepower. Wan Mao stood with his gun horizontal and his mech erect. The blue medieval-style mammoth exuded an aura that belied its tonnage. The crimson python in his hand unleashed full firepower energy, pouring out bullets raining down like a storm. What was clearly a heavy gun fired at the rate of a submachine gun. In an instant, the scrap hovercar was riddled with holes. The blazing bullets pierced through the hovercar, carrying debris and leaving clear bullet marks on the Gladiator's armor. Boom. The next second, the hovercar finally succumbed and exploded with a loud bang. The explosion sent a pillar of fire soaring into the sky, and the shockwave violently pushed back Lao Hei's Gladiator, flipping the dozen Soften's mech over. The deafening explosion also caught the attention of the director, and the broadcast screen was quickly split in two. One side showed the battle in the center of the battlefield, where several mechs were fighting for the flag. The other side showed Wan Mao firing at the Gladiator. In the frame, the 5-meter mammoth stomped flat the frame of the exploded hovercar, stepped out of the rolling flames with gun in hand, and strode forward. What a thrill. What a damn thrill. In the previous 5 matches, Wan Mao had played cautiously and had never experienced the feeling of completely dominating a mech like this. At this moment, he felt the blood boiling in his veins. The crimson python's bullets, as if free, crazily poured onto the Gladiator. In an instant, the Gladiator's external armor was damaged. With a loud explosion, the garbage mountain behind the mech also collapsed, and countless mechanical debris crashed down, burying the Gladiator underneath. Instantly, the viewers of the live stream were shaken. Wasn't it said that energy guns had poor lethality and poor armor penetration? Is this considered poor? It directly punched through the mech. Mornuo, is this an energy gun? Is this damn thing an energy gun? Didn't they say energy guns can't penetrate field mech armor? Announcer, give me a reasonable explanation. Brutal Mary, oh my god, is the energy gun this powerful? No, I'm going to order one right now. A mechanic who wished to remain anonymous. Brutal Mary, be rational. Miss Mary, be rational. This energy gun is clearly modified. An ordinary energy gun cannot have such strong lethality. This gun. Kenny was also shocked by the Crimson Python's firepower, but his professionalism helped him quickly recover. He continued his commentary. Ladies and gentlemen, don't blindly place orders. This heavy energy gun of contestant Decent is clearly modified, and judging by its lethality, it's likely a brute force modification. Such modification will greatly reduce the weapon's lifespan, making it not worth the cost. Kenny wants to remind everyone that this is not just a racetrack, but also a battlefield. Our contestants are fighting for freedom, and even more so for their lives. They have no retreat, so they burn their boats. Please do not use the perspective of watching those professional leagues that have extremely high safety factors and no danger at all to judge our competition. These words both explained the situation and elevated the status of the Death Star. Capture the flag. It seems you are indeed a talent. In the monitoring room, Simon looked at Lin Jie with considerable surprise. He had just witnessed the entire process of Wan Mao shooting the gladiator, but since he didn't understand mechanics, he thought it was normal. After reading the bullet comments and hearing Kenny's explanation, he looked at Lin Jie with a delighted expression. From his perspective, Lin Jie had clearly come to him with no other options. He didn't have high expectations for Lin Jie, thinking he could at least repair the mammoth. But he didn't expect Lin Jie to bring him an unexpected surprise. You're wrong, boss. I'm not a talent. Oh, then what are you? I'm a genius. Simon looked at Lin Jie momentarily speechless. Having dominated the world for so many years, he had rarely seen anyone as thick-skinned as Lin Jie. The most ironic thing was that when such a shameless remark came out of his mouth, he even felt that it was right. On the other side of the battlefield, Wan Mao stood still with the Crimson Python in hand, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of the fight. Speaking of which, in the 5 matches of the flag capture, this was the first time he had eliminated an opponent. Previously, because his mech's configuration was completely inferior, he could only avoid combat, play cat and mouse with his opponents, and then join the flag capture at the end, relying on the mammoth's agility and his own piloting skills to stall until the end of the match and win. This time, personally destroying a mech felt completely different. He looked at the Crimson Python in the mammoth's hand. If he wasn't still on the battlefield, he would have jumped out of the cockpit and kissed the gun. This exhilarating feeling was simply too satisfying. Wan Mao, time is running out. Suddenly Lin Jie's voice came through the radio, jolting Wan Mao awake. He looked up at the timer and realized that the flag capture had been going on for 33 minutes. With a total duration of 40 minutes, it was now in the final phase. Damn! Wan Mao's heart skipped a beat. He turned and saw on the wreckage of a warship hundreds of meters high 3 mechs climbing while exchanging fire. The blue flag at the top was less than 40 meters away. Damn, I got held up by Lao He. Wan Mao gritted his teeth and strode towards the warship. The entire battle process just now seemed quick, but before the fight, he had been hiding in the distance observing for a while. Then the fight with Lao He, which involved flanking maneuvers, had consumed a lot of time. The remaining time was already tight. Distance 574 meters, slope 54 degrees, a few footholds, combat interference. Pilot Decent, the remaining time is not enough for us to reach the top of the warship. Wan Mao sprinted to the base of the warship and heard the analysis from the AI Kai in, rolling his eyes. Field mechs have large tonnage and high horsepower, but their structure and thick armor mean they are slow and lack good climbing and jumping abilities. Even if the mech's power could support a high jump, the structure could not withstand the impact of dozens of tons of body landing from a height. As Kyan analyzed, it was simply impossible to climb all the way to the top of the warship with the constant threat of combat interference. All Wan Mao could do now seemed to be watch helplessly as the 3 mechs got closer to the flag. Speaking of which, since the 3 mechs had such obvious advantages, didn't the other mechs unite to target them? No, they didn't. Just like how Simon and Lin Jie's boss had a feud, the more than 20 prison bosses participating in the flag capture all had irreconcilable grudges with each other. Rather than uniting to take down the strongest, they preferred to let no one win if I can't win, which made the advantages of the 3 mechs particularly prominent. Especially in such complex terrain, they could rely on their mech's performance to widen the gap. At that moment, Lin Jie was piloting the Demolisher, climbing steadily while exchanging fire with the Red Dragon. But he didn't notice that at the end of the warship, Wan Mao had already raised his gun. As mentioned before, among the 3 mechs, Wan Mao was more inclined to let no one win if Lin Jie can't win. You destroyed my mech before. This time it's my turn for revenge. Wan Mao murmured and pulled the trigger. Boom. Lin Jie advanced steadily. He was now the foremost among the 3 mechs, less than 10 meters from the top. Facing a steep slope with no footholds, he could only use the Demolisher's iron fist to punch through the warship's deck anchor himself and try to move toward the alloy stakes nearby. These stakes were used to secure small spacecraft during the warship's interstellar jumps, and they were fairly sturdy. Once there, he could climb to the observation tower above, and with the Demolisher's power, he could jump over a distance of 7 or 8 meters to reach the top of the tower. However, before he could make his next move, the visual signal flashed red as the mech's lower limbs came on. It's this guy again. Lin Jie turned around and saw Wan Mao firing from behind. Fortunately, the military mech's thick armor and the distance meant the attack didn't have much effect on the demolisher. Lin Jie gritted his teeth, and the demolisher suddenly exerted force, leaping directly toward the alloy stakes. However, the next second, Lin Jie was dumbfounded. The moment he jumped, Wan Mao shifted his target, pouring bullets into the stakes he had intended to land on. The warship was already a war-torn wreck, and most of the stakes were damaged. Under Wan Mao's barrage, most of them fell quickly, and the remaining stakes were not enough to support the demolisher's massive tonnage. Thus, Lin Jie missed his footing and slid directly down the warship. The dozen Soften's iron body rolled and tumbled, destroying many structures on the deck before finally crashing down. Decent. A roar of fury came from the smoke. Lights first shone through, and then the demolisher emerged from the thick smoke. Lin Jie in the cockpit had a venomous look with a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Military mechs were designed for practicality with extremely thick external armor. Coupled with the buffer of destroying many buildings along the way, he managed to land safely. However, the immense impact still injured his internal organs. Moreover, with little time left in the match, it was impossible for him to climb back up. Wan Mao had single-handedly destroyed his almost certain victory. Bastard. You like shooting, don't you? Lin Jie gritted his teeth, took down the mounted machine gun from his waist, and aimed directly at Wan Mao. The next second, 60mm bullets like small grenades poured out, sweeping a straight line across the ground straight toward Wan Mao. The terrifying firepower shattered the mammoth's energy shield in an instant. Damn! Wan Mao cursed, performing a tactical roll to hide behind a meteorite. However, the meteorite did not provide the protection he imagined. In the blink of an eye, Lin Jie's bullets pierced through the meteorite, flying past the mammoth's body. Come on, come out. What the hell are you hiding for? The loss of the victory in hand made Lin Jie extremely furious. The dozen Soften's demolisher held the gun with both arms, the massive bullet chain inside the mech furiously outputting one shell casing after another, falling to the ground as he approached. The 60mm armor-piercing bullets crazily poured onto the meteorite, punching hole after hole. There's no other cover nearby. This meteorite won't hold for long. You must counterattack, or you and the mammoth will be riddled by the demolisher. At the critical moment, Lin Jie's voice rang out again. Counterattack! Counterattack! Under the hail of bullets, the mammoth's body had already suffered damage, and Wan Mao's pressure was at its peak. Of course, he knew he had to counterattack, but with such firepower, what could he use to fight back? Even if he exchanged fire, the Crimson Python's firepower couldn't hurt the demolisher. Wait. Firepower! Wan Mao's eyes flashed, and he suddenly looked at the Crimson Python in his hand. The gray-white gun lay quietly in the mammoth's hand, the gear set to normal mode, and the energy reactor still had nearly half of its energy. Let's do it. Wan Mao gritted his teeth and abruptly switched the gear to war mode. Although Lin Jie had said war mode carried the risk of a barrel explosion, he couldn't care less now. Turning the power to maximum, a flash of madness crossed Wan Mao's eyes. He turned and stepped out from behind the meteorite, aimed the muzzle at Lin Jie, who was walking toward him, and pulled the trigger fiercely. At this moment, it was gun against gun, bullet against bullet. Real man against real man. Virum. Suddenly, the Crimson Python's energy conversion device let out a beast-like roar, frantically draining the energy from the reactor. The gun body, weighing 700 or 800 Gene, began to tremble violently. The next second, devastating bullets like a volcanic eruption poured out of the muzzle. Boom! The extreme rate of fire made the firing sounds merge into one, and the energy in the Crimson Python's reactor dropped rapidly, visible to the naked eye. Lin Jie's firepower was almost instantly engulfed. Countless energy bullets slammed into the demolisher's body, sending out countless sparks and black smoke. The demolisher staggered backward as if hit by a warship until it was smashed into the garbage mountain and completely swallowed by thick smoke. Crack! A sharp sound, and the Crimson Python's firepower ceased. This gun was, after all, a retired defective product. Its energy reactor could not withstand such high power output and shattered directly. All eyes were locked on the demolisher, swallowed by smoke. 1 second, 2 seconds. Finally, the smoke cleared, revealing the scene inside. The demolisher's right arm and head had been blown off. The entire external armor was covered in indentations of varying degrees. The most severe damage was to the cockpit area, where the chest armor had a large hole, revealing Lin Jie still unconscious inside his fate unknown. The demolisher was deeply embedded in the garbage mountain, emitting scorched black smoke. In an instant, the dark web live stream exploded. This. Kenny stared blankly at the broadcast screen, momentarily losing all words. The director also forgot to shift the camera, fixing the close-up on Mammoth and Bomber so that no one noticed that the Red Dragon had already successfully captured the flag. Curly also stared blankly at the opposite side, making no further move. The entire world seemed to freeze at this moment. Even Lin Jie himself instinctively glanced at the cable plugged into the console. After witnessing the power of the red serpent, he felt that compared to it, an electric shock didn't seem so unbearable. It wasn't until the end-of-game prompt sounded that everyone woke up as if from a dream, gasping for air, like drowning survivors climbing back to shore, and rapidly began conversing in the livestream. Cruel Mary, am I seeing things? I must be seeing things. Could an energy gun really have this kind of destructive power? Starbeast Surgeon, did you see that fire rate just now? The dense shots blended together into a single sound. Kyle, impossible. Absolutely impossible. A classy energy gun could never have such lethal force. That mammoth pilot must have cheated by carrying an overspec weapon. A mechanic who prefers to remain anonymous, it doesn't look like cheating. The commentator was right. It's a basic Class E heavy energy gun, and he even named the manufacturer. I recall it too, I can't be mistaken. With this structure, the output level can't exceed the Class E cap. I can explain the principle. With billions of viewers online, the sudden surge of high-frequency messages crashed the Darknet's livestream server, plunging the entire room into darkness and paralyzing the chat system. Countless viewers scratched their heads in frustration. Just when things were getting critical, it crashes. Can it crash later? Fix it. Fix it now? Buzz, the technology of the interstellar universe, didn't disappoint. In just a few seconds, the Darknet resolved the issue. The livestream resumed, but the camera was no longer focused on the battlefield. Instead, it had shifted to the studio, zooming in on commentator Kenny. Ladies and gentlemen, the Death Star flag capture match has come to an end. The champion is our pilot, Huku, commanding the Red Dragon. Kenny's professionalism shone through as he had already emerged from his shock and calmly recounted the results of the match. He also understood where everyone's true interest lay. So after announcing the results and offering a brief analysis, he steered the conversation back to the Red Serpent. The most surprising element of this match was undoubtedly player Decent. The energy gun wielded by his mammoth mech stunned us all, even surpassing the host's own understanding. We also understand that many friends suspect Descend's energy gun might be overspec. On this matter, Kenny can assure every viewer here that all mechs and weapons in the Death Star flag capture undergo rigorous inspection. This gun's output level is entirely within Class E standards. The reason for such terrifying firepower is entirely due to it being violently modified by a highly skilled mechanic. As you saw, the energy furnace couldn't withstand such violent output and self-destructed. As for the identity of that skilled mechanic, we are not at liberty to disclose. Even with violent modification, could a Class E energy gun really reach this level? On the planet car in the state of Monaire, Zhang Rui and Bei Ji exchanged glances, their faces filled with disbelief. Compared to others in the livestream, the two of them were absolute professionals. From the lowest private rank to the current dominator level, they had experience piloting all grades of mechs and were familiar with various weapon classes. In their understanding, a Class E weapon, especially a Class E energy gun, simply couldn't produce such output. Energy weapons were typically used to clear out minor enemies with suppression power insufficient even to push back a mech, let alone pierce through military-grade armor. How about we buy one and try it? Bei Ji asked, looking at Zhang Rui. She still remembered the commentator mentioning the gun's manufacturer and model. I was thinking the same thing. Zhang Rui nodded, already opening her communicator to search and order online. As a star player and dominator-level pilot, buying a basic Class E weapon was trivial for her. She was genuinely curious why this gun could have such terrifying lethality. As for the modification issue, that was even simpler. Their Neptune Club was one of the largest racing game clubs in the Car Star state, housing countless high-level mechanics, at least Vanguard rank. Modifying a gun would be child's play, right? No matter how skilled a prison mechanic might be, he couldn't possibly be better than theirs, could he? Brother Lin. Outside the arena on Death Star, Curly had just jumped off his mech when he sprinted over to Lin Jie and gave him a big hug. If Lin Jie hadn't stopped him, he might have even tried to kiss him. Brother Lin, from now on you're my brother, my real brother. Curly was ecstatic. Although they hadn't won the match, the terrifying output of that energy gun had shown him Lin Jie's capabilities. If all of Lin Jie's mechanical creations met this standard, he could completely compensate for the mech's shortcomings with external equipment, greatly increasing his chances of capturing the flag. Don't call me Brother Lin. Lin Jie pushed Curly away with some distaste and brushed the dust off his clothes. It feels weird. Then how about Brother Jie? They'll call you Brother Jie from now on. Just call me Brother Lin. Lin Jie, Curly, and Simon chatted as they boarded the transport ship back. That evening, in high spirits, Simon opened another bottle of fine wine and invited Lin Jie and Curly to sit down. Curly, you played brilliantly today, especially when you nearly wrecked Lin Jie. I bet Huasite's face is sour right now. That's worth celebrating. Simon rubbed his bald head with one hand while pouring wine for Curly and Lin Jie with the other, grinning from ear to ear. Huasite was Lin Jie's boss and Simon's nemesis. Curly's victory over Lin Jie in a direct confrontation made Simon happier than a win. Boss, I was pushed to the limit. Also, I owe it to Brother Lin's modified energy gun. Without that gun, I might be the one whose fate is unknown now. Curly didn't take credit, speaking honestly. Right, Lin Jie has been a huge help too. You. Simon turned to Lin Jie with a smile. He was about to say, you can make any request, and he'll do my best to fulfill it, but then he remembered something and changed course. Lin Jie, that energy gun is completely wrecked. You might not find another like it in the junk zone. Could you modify other machines to achieve the same effect? Of course, if the cube cooperated. Lin Jie rolled his eyes internally and said, not all of them will be as strong as that gun, but there will definitely be some enhancement. Great, that's wonderful. Simon was clearly very satisfied with Lin Jie's answer. His demeanor changed entirely, and even his bald head seemed to gleam a little brighter. Seeing Curly and Lin Jie sitting on either side of him, he felt as if he had already caught a glimpse of the day he would regain his freedom. Growing happier, he quickly raised his glass, first toasting Lin Jie cheers. Then he raised his glass to Curly strong. Familiar lines. Lin Jie and Curly exchanged a glance, then raised their glasses simultaneously to toast Simon. Boss, you're both tall and strong. The next morning in the recreation area, Curly was conducting simple inspections and adjustments on Mammoth, while Simon stood opposite the mech watching. Lin Jie the mechanic was instead sitting on a chair holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a laptop in the other, browsing the darknet forums with keen interest. Because the viewership for the flag capture battle reached another all-time high, the warden, tormented by his menopause, decided to postpone the next flag capture battle by 2 days, also scheduling it on a rest day. This would not only ensure more viewers on the day of the competition, but also prolong the intermission between the two matches, allowing the afterglow of the previous match to continue fermenting and attract more people. Then the remaining time could be used to promote the next match. At the same time, it also gave the contestants more time to make more detailed adjustments and repairs to their mechs. This allowed Lin Jie to proceed without haste, enabling him to browse the internet and slack off in peace. Meanwhile, the hottest topic on the darknet was still the flag capture battle on Death Star. Cully's outrageous performance yesterday, carrying an energy rifle and blowing up military armor, had occupied the top spot on the hot discussion list, with countless posts bombarding in waves. Titles like shocking, entertainment mech destroys military mech, one energy rifle changes the battle landscape, even the energy rifle found it outrageous, so it exploded, and so on kept emerging, and the click rates were climbing rapidly. But if you asked Lin Jie, these darknet headlines were still keeping their integrity too well. If it were him, he would probably have changed them to something like, riding the war mech under me, if I'm not invincible then who is, why not rise with the wind? If we disagree, I'll shoot you dead, that day my barrel pierced into the military mech's cockpit, and so on. Regardless of the content, just putting out these headlines alone would surely make the click rates leave all others. Of course, this is the darknet forum. Those who can thrive here and have a decent number of views on their posts are at least local influencers, so they might not be unable to come up with such titles. However, compared to so-called gimmicks, they might care more about saving face. In summary, the shock brought by Red Python on the battlefield reached its peak overnight, and even many wealthy people specifically bought the unmodified version of Red Python to try its effect. Along with that, they also became somewhat curious about the mechanic behind Curly. However, it was only curiosity. No matter what, Red Python was still just in a grade equipment too low in grade. It's like if in a primary school sports meet a first-grade boy breaks the city record for the 100-meter dash among first graders. People generally just nod and say impressive, and may not even ask who the boy is. Firstly, because even if they asked, they might not know him. Secondly, even if they did know him, it wouldn't mean much. After all, he's just a first-grade boy. Just like Red Python, no matter what, it's just in a grade energy rifle. If Red Python really had any practical impact, it was probably making people realize that Curly now had a skilled mechanic behind him, and he was no longer fighting alone. Coupled with Cully's own great advantage, his odds of winning on the betting sites rose a bit. Brother Lin, the mech's hardware is all intact, only the external armor has a certain degree of damage. The problem now is that Mammoth's alloy battle blade is severely damaged and probably hard to repair. But I believe you, Brother Lin, must have a way. At that moment, Curly approached Lin Jie and said enthusiastically, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Lin Jie looked at Curly and shrugged. Perhaps it was due to a long drought meeting rain. Curly now looked at him with more enthusiasm than he would at a pretty girl. Unfortunately, enthusiasm alone couldn't feed them. Alloy battle blades, especially those for field mechs, have never been difficult in terms of mechanical technology, but rather in the steel itself. The properties of the raw material determine the blade's durability and lethality. Take yesterday's flag capture battle, for example. The sword of Red Dragon was clearly superior in material selection and smelting to Mammoth's sword, thus, it was able to severely damage Mammoth's battle blade in just a few engagements. This damage was purely from brute force clashes, not something that could be repaired or compensated for by mechanical. Moreover, the flag capture battle does not allow using items brought in from outside. They can only source materials from the junk mountain. So whether they can find another alloy battle blade depends on luck. They would have to see if there was a relatively intact and usable A-grade alloy battle blade in the junk mountain. Lin Jie said, If we can't find one, there's nothing I can do. He'll just have to try to strengthen other configurations as much as possible and see if we can make up for the disadvantage of not having a blade. Curly nodded vigorously. Brother Lin, I trust you. Is that so? Then I really can't let you down. Lin Jie glanced at Curly, then put down his laptop, walked to the front of Mammoth with a serious expression, opened a piece of armor on the leg, reached inside, and pulled out 2 cables. Although he also had enough knowledge to strengthen some mech weapons through modifications, the improvements were still far inferior to those of Red Python. Lin Jie also came to realize that having a treasure trove, but not using it was like not having it at all. The mechanical equipment in the cube was clearly a tier above what he had learned in this world, so there was no reason for him not to use it. Taking this opportunity, he could also test whether the method to activate the cube was indeed electric shock. As for whether it was inappropriate to do it in front of Curly and Simon, there was no way to avoid it. The changes caused by electric shock to a person are impossible to hide, and it would be equally difficult to explain later. So it was better to just do it openly. At this moment, all he needed was to move both hands forward by 10 centimeters, each grab the cable connectors, and he would successfully form a closed circuit, allowing electricity to flow through himself. Lin Jie looked at Simon and smiled. Do you believe that I can get a perm in an instant? In less than a minute I can make my hairstyle just like Cully's. Perm. Simon rubbed his bald head, a bit puzzled by Lin Jie's meaning. But Cully's expression changed, and he opened his mouth to shout. Unfortunately, before he could yell out, "Don't," Lin Jie had already gripped the 2 cables and jammed them directly into his own body. A real man must be tough on himself. You mean that heavy energy gun in the flag-grabbing battle was Lin Jie's doing? Death Star 9th Prison. Warden's office. Jana was still wearing that classic blue business suit, sitting behind her desk, her hands folded together, support. The communication light on the desk phone was on, and that familiar authoritative voice sounded from within. It seems Lin Jie isn't just alive, but living quite well. Ms. Jana, I am disappointed in you. I'm sorry, sir. Jana lowered her head as she replied. This time, unlike before, she was not agitated by Lin Jie and appeared much calmer. I don't want to hear meaningless apologies. I only want results. Forgive my impertinence, sir, but why must you have Lin Jie killed? Just do your job. The tone on the other end of the line suddenly rose, cutting off Janice's words and ending the call. In the quiet room, the busy signal of the communicator was unusually clear. You cowardly bastard. Jana raised her head, a hint of malevolence on her face. As someone who had long navigated the corridors of bureaucracy, Jana understood clearly that when these bigwigs chose an outsider like her instead of their trusted confidants for certain tasks, there could only be 2 reasons. First, there were shady matters involved. Second, it would be convenient to find a scapegoat when things went wrong. Clearly, she was now that potential scapegoat. He won't even divulge some truth to me, which means this matter is no small thing. My political career cannot have such a hidden danger. So killing Lin Jie absolutely cannot be done by my own hands, or he'll never be free of involvement. Jana leaned back in her office chair, her fingers rhythmically tapping the desk. Bang! Just then the office door was pushed open and a guard walked in. Warden Horst has been brought here. Let him in. Jana nodded. The guard turned and left the office. Soon a man covered in green walked in. Like Lin Jie's mechanic, he was a Tarnasian with green skin, a tentacle-like appendage on his head, a large head, but cramped facial features looking much like a boo painted green. He was Horst, the one with a grudge that Simon had mentioned. What do you want? Horst strode up to the desk, looking down at Jana, his words showing no respect for her as warden. Mr. Horst, you and Simon seem to have some issues, don't you? I don't want to hear that guy's name. Horst's face darkened, and the green tentacle on his head instantly stiffened. This was the Tarnasian's manifestation of intense emotional fluctuation. Seems there is real enmity. Looking at the erect tentacle, Jana smiled. Don't misunderstand me, Mr. Horst. I didn't invite you for any other reason, just to ask. You wouldn't want Simon to gain freedom, would you? Horst frowned slightly. What are you getting at? It's simple. You don't want Simon to be free, and I happen to want that machine beside him dead. I think we can cooperate. Oh. Horst's expression shifted, softening considerably. The tentacle on his head drooped, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face. Tell me, how do we cooperate? A few days ago, when we were looking for parts in the garbage area, Brother Lin did get shocked. He said it was intentional to change his hairstyle. I didn't believe it then, but now I think it might be true. I've heard that geniuses are a bit crazy, and it turns out to be true. But he's also exceptionally gifted, getting shocked like that, and still being fine. That evening in Simon's presidential cell, Simon and Curly sat together looking shaken. It had been 10 hours since Lin Jie's heroic electric shock. Perhaps because it was so shocking, when Lin Jie picked up the cable to electrocute himself during the day, even a big shot like Simon was dumbfounded, frozen for over 20 seconds before remembering to rescue him. At that moment, Lin Jie's hair stood on end, his body convulsed, foam bubbled from his mouth, and he seemed to be breathing his last, scaring Simon into running to the room for healing potions. But in that brief time in and out, when Simon came out, Lin Jie had already regained consciousness. Aside from some residual spasms, his mental state was surprisingly good. Judging by his attitude, if Simon hadn't stopped him, he would have wanted to touch the electric socket again. Could it be a special constitution? Simon rubbed his bald head, still finding it somewhat unbelievable. As a high-level martial artist, Simon didn't know if Lin Jie had spiritual power, but he was clear that Lin Jie's body still belonged to the ordinary human category. He hadn't noticed at the time, but thinking back, an ordinary person suffering such an electric shock would at best have their skin burned and become paralyzed. At worst, they would die on the spot. But looking at Lin Jie, aside from some blackening, there wasn't a single visible external injury, and within just a few hours, he was lively again. Truly a spectacle. Boss, should we ask Brother Lin again what's going on? Curly lowered his voice. No need. Simon shook his head. We already asked during the day, didn't we? The reasons he gave. Electricity makes you healthier, electric shock benefits muscle strength. Did any of them sound real? Everyone has their secrets. Even if you ask, he might not tell. Even if he tells, you might not believe. And even if you believe what he says, might not be true. With that, Simon let out a long sigh and sank back into the sofa. Lin Jie's electric shock was just a minor incident. Regardless of the reason, whether the shock truly benefited him or he simply enjoyed being hurt, it didn't matter. As long as Lin Jie wasn't in danger and remained useful to him, everything else was a small problem. Even if he liked touching electric sockets or even chewing hand grenades, Simon could afford it. My deduction was right. Electric shock is how the cube recharges. And this cube seems to have altered my constitution, greatly reducing the damage electricity does to me. In the bedroom, Lin Jie, though appearing to rest with eyes closed, was actually observing the cube inside his body. After the energy replenishment during the day, the number 3 was now displayed again on top of the cube. Having been shocked for nearly half a minute during the day, the number of times he could twist the cube had also increased by. In the next few days, he'll be busy making and maintaining weapons for Mammoth. I can't keep touching electric sockets idly. I have only these 3 opportunities, so I must cherish them. As he thought, Lin Jie carefully observed the patterns on the cube. The last time he had transmigrated it was because he had pieced together those fragmented lines into an unknown pattern. He figured that if he truly assembled a complete pattern, there should be a greater reward. Though the steps were insufficient for now, little by little, Lin Jie believed that as long as he worked diligently in the future, constantly touching electric sockets, he would eventually piece it together. Click. For a mechanic like Lin Jie, spatial imagination was a must. This cube was no challenge for him. With just one look, he had already found the solution, and with his mind, he twisted the cube. Then, as before, the cube vibrated slightly, and the light gray patterns on its surface flickered with a pale blue glow, converging above the cube, and eventually forming the shape of a mechanical arm guard. Mechanic's gloves. Type mechanical arm guard. Grade E. Mode 1. Output energy level 70. Equipment requirement: possess intact arms.